Everything kicks off with a desperate cry echoing through a peaceful mountain village. Right in the middle of the street, a young man with green hair is furiously confronting an elderly man, while the villagers just watch in fear. He grabs the senior citizen aggressively, demanding to know if there is an elf in the village because his captain wants to see her. Not getting the answer he wanted, the bully tosses the poor old man to the ground without a shred of pity. The villagers start whispering to each other, commenting that the youth is part of a dangerous gang of orphans that has been causing panic in the area. One man laments the situation, saying that the advance of the Demon King's army is leaving the world in chaos and overrun with outlaws. Another villager adds that noble territories are under constant attack and that even a neighboring count's manor was devastated. The bully gets annoyed by the whispers and shouts at the crowd, warning them that this isn't some show for them to gawk at. As the people consider calling the guards before things get worse, a mysterious figure approaches calmly. The henchman goes back to threatening the elderly man, raising his fist and saying he will really hurt him if he keeps staying silent. He delivers a violent blow toward the defenseless man, ordering him to just give up. But suddenly, a hand appears out of nowhere and catches the attacker's punch with total ease. The one who saved the day was a boy with blue hair, who calmly complains about all that irritating noise. The young man tells the elder to step back and warns the bully that he is the one handling things now. The henchman is furious to see some kid playing hero, but the blue-haired boy immediately reveals he heard about the search for an elf in the village. Thinking he hit the jackpot, the thug gives a malicious grin, realizing the boy knows something. The boy says he isn't saying a word and demands to be taken immediately to the gang leader if the bully doesn't want to get hurt. This audacity leaves the criminal completely beside himself with rage. Screaming at the youth not to underestimate him, the henchman tries to land a punch with all his might. Yet in the blink of an eye, the bully ends up stretched out on the ground, having absolutely no idea what happened. Completely dazed, the fallen attacker tries to process how he was defeated after seeing only a bright flash. The blue-haired boy just mocks the situation, commenting that the bully had a lot of guts for someone so weak. With an extremely menacing look, he asks the henchman if they should test exactly how much of a beating he can take. In a shack on the outskirts, the gang leader shouts furiously at the delay in his men bringing him the elf. He slams the table, indignant to learn that his henchmen were easily defeated by some random kid. The leader grumbles to himself, annoyed at having to deal with this problem personally. Suddenly, the door to the hideout is kicked open by the blue-haired boy, who enters dragging the defeated henchman. The gang boss is left completely speechless at the sight of that unbelievable scene. The rest of the thugs inside the place also go into shock at the sudden arrival of the intruder. The boy looks around and asks the henchman ironically if he brought him to the wrong place, since no one seemed happy to see him. With his face all swollen from the beating, the desperate henchman guarantees this is the right place and begs them to stop calling him Navi since his name is Sigmel. The boy squeezes Zigmel's head hard and warns him that if he is lying, he will beat the truth out of him. One of the henchmen mocks Sigmel for getting beaten up by a child, warning him that the boss is furious about his failure. Without wasting time on the goons, the blue-haired boy asks the leader directly if he is the one responsible for causing trouble in the village, looking for the elf. The boss gives an arrogant smile and asks if he is the brat who lives with the wanted elf. The boy demands to know the reason they are after his sister, and the leader responds with the sneer that they intend to have some fun with her before selling her off. Hearing that, the youth realizes that continuing to talk to these guys is just a complete waste of time. With that, he decides to slowly close the hideout door so that no one can escape. The thugs start laughing at the boy's attitude, not understanding why he is locking himself in with them. The boy shuts the door completely, isolating all the criminals inside the cabin. An overwhelming aura starts to emanate from the youth while he holds the hilt of his sword and warns that he will say two important things. The leader ignores the warning and cracks a joke, mocking the boy's words and questioning if that sword is even real. He sneers, saying the weapon is way too much for a kid like him to handle and demands he hand over the elf at once. But the atmosphere changes suddenly and the gang leader starts sweating cold as he feels a lethal pressure in the air. Bending the metal bar of the door with his own hands, the youth finally introduces himself as Eldmia Aga. The henchmen are left completely terrified to see such a monstrous display of strength done with bare hands. The leader gulps, realizing the situation has become extremely dangerous for their side. Trying to mask his panic, he yells for his men to attack at once, claiming the boy's sword must be fake. Overcoming their initial fear, the whole group of thugs advances armed toward Eldmia with bloodthirst. The boss promises to give the boy's sword to whoever manages to defeat him, while Eldmia just prepares coldly to finish them all. Eldmia looks at the frightened children in the hideout and realizes that instead of a dangerous gang, they're just a bunch of defenseless kids. He notes that the scale of the group is even smaller than he imagined when he sees the dread in the eyes of a girl with glasses. Concentrating his magical power, the youth decides that the best strategy in that situation is to act fast. In an extremely swift movement, Eldmia passes like a blue lightning bolt by the surprised henchman. The gang boss barely has time to react as he sees the boy suddenly appear right in front of him. Eldmia readies a devastating punch wrapped in flames of blue energy. Focused on taking down the leader of the group first, he delivers the blow with overwhelming force. The impact is so brutal that the gang boss lets out a cry of pain while his eyes lose focus. A huge explosion of smoke and dust fills the hideout where the leader was sitting. The henchmen and the children are left completely paralyzed in shock at seeing their boss defeated in a single instant. Eldmia stands before the knocked-out villain and warns coldly that they should remember a second very important rule. He crosses his arms with total tranquility to conclude his warning. With a frightening smile, the youth makes it clear that they should never, ever annoy Eldmia Aga. Meanwhile, the day begins to end in a cozy cabin isolated in the mountains. A beautiful elf with long blonde hair sighs as she realizes the boy ended up getting into another fight before returning home. She asks mockingly if he hadn't said that those guys were even worth the effort of dealing with personally. The elf, named Basilia Enderenia, looks fixedly at him, waiting for a convincing explanation. Eldmia lets out an awkward laugh and tries to change the subject, saying those bullies really didn't deserve his attention. He sighs as he sits down, explaining that he couldn't just stand by while listening to those idiots talk badly about his sister. Basilia serves the meal and smiles affectionately, commenting that, even though he is only 11 years old, he talks like an adult, although she would prefer that he avoided violence. She then asks why he took so long if the fight was supposed to have been quick, reminding him that it is already getting dark. The boy explains that he settled everything quickly but ended up delayed while questioning a group of fugitives kneeling before him. Eldmia remembers pinching the cheek of one of them, discovering that they weren't war orphans, but just mischievous boys who promised to go back home. The youth sighs with relief as he sees the fugitive boys running back to their families while thanking him for the lesson. Next, he turned to the other children who remained and asked why they weren't going home too. The girl with glasses answered with great sadness that they simply had no home left to go back to. At that moment, Elmir realized that those children were in fact true orphans. Scratching his head, he understood that he couldn't just ignore that difficult situation. Back in the present, the youth tells Asilia that he was delayed because he wanted to find a safe place for the orphans to live since their situation reminded him of his own past. He feels immensely grateful to have his sister by his side, unlike those little ones who lost everything. He explains that those children just needed an opportunity in life and that he wanted to be the person to give them that chance. Elmia blushes a little and admits with a laugh that saying those things out loud is a bit embarrassing for him. Moved by the boy's kindness, Asilia jumps on him with a tight hug to celebrate how incredible her little brother is. The two end up lying on the floor resting, and the elf comments with nostalgia that 3 years have passed since the day they met. She looks at the ceiling and says that she never imagined having such a peaceful and happy life, which seems like a distant dream. Eldmia agrees in silence and starts to reflect on what would have happened to them if they had met that day. He closes his eyes slowly as the memories of the past start to invade his mind. The youth recalls in detail what his first and tragic meeting with Asilia was like. 3 years ago, little Elmia was crying and exhausted in the middle of a battle, holding his sword with difficulty. Before him, young Asilia was chained and wearing a slave collar, looking at the sky with a countenance of pure sadness. In that moment of desperation, the boy drove his blade into the ground with determination. Seriously wounded, the youth ended up falling to his knees on the muddy ground. Even so, he managed to stand right in front of the imprisoned elf, who watched him without understanding anything. Elmir recalls with pain that on that terrible day when his former village was destroyed, he lost absolutely everything he had. At the time, Asilia was running desperately through the forest trying to escape her captors. The mercenaries shouted at each other through the ruins, ordering them to conduct thorough searches because she couldn't have gone far. The men destroyed everything in their path in a desperate attempt to find the fugitive elf. One of the thugs kicked the door of one of the remaining cabins with violence in the hope of finding her hidden. The leader of the mercenaries, furious, yelled at his men, reminding them of the immense value that the elf had and threatening to kill them if they let her escape. While the relentless search continued, a mysterious boy with black hair and a stone necklace observed everything in silence in the middle of the shadows. The memory of the past starts with Eldmia's pendant opening, revealing the portrait of his beloved mother smiling. However, the sweet memory is brutally interrupted when one of the mercenaries rips the necklace from the boy's neck with violence. The leader steals the jewel, saying it won't be of any use in the afterlife, while a subordinate reports that he didn't find the elf anywhere and fears that she may have fled using magic. Furious, the boss curses the henchman as an idiot, reminding him that they placed a restriction collar on the elf precisely to prevent her from using her powers. Hidden nearby, Asilia hears the approach of the enemies and panics, not knowing what to do to avoid being captured again. Letting out a groan of pain due to her injuries, she manages to enter one of the abandoned cabins in a hurry. In a great rush, the elf manages to close the wooden door behind her to try to throw the band off her track. She leans against the wall, relieved not to have been seen, but asks herself in anguish what her next step should be. Suddenly, an unexpected noise right behind her makes her heart race in fright. As she turns around startled, Asilia comes face to face with little Eldmia in there, who is also hidden in the same spot. The boy widens his eyes and is in shock upon realizing that the young woman before him is a real elf. Outside, the leader of the mercenaries gets annoyed with the delay and decides to activate a pain spell through a magic sphere in his hands. The dark magic is sent directly to the restriction collar on Asilia's neck. The pain generated by the electric discharge in the collar is so unbearable that the elf falls to the floor, letting out a cry of pure agony. Hearing the desperate scream, the mercenaries locate the hideout and run toward the cabin, pointing their weapons. They invade the place and find the elf fallen and panting, mocking the hard work she gave them to be captured again. The boss drags her out without pity and orders his men to collect everything of value before they leave. Even while being taken as a prisoner, Asilia's only worry is to know if the little boy who is in the cabin will be okay. It is revealed that just before being caught, she managed to hide Eldmia in a hurry inside a wooden closet to spare his life. But as the group prepares to leave, a strange noise coming from the same house draws the attention of all the mercenaries. To the surprise of the band, little Eldmia comes out of the cabin dragging a huge silver sword along the ground. Trembling with fear but with his gaze fixed on the enemies, the little boy tries to gather strength to face them. Seeing that scene from his prison, Asilia falls into absolute despair for seeing the boy expose himself to danger in that way. The leader enjoys the situation, commenting that it is a surprise to have a survivor there and orders them to take the boy to sell him as well. One of the henchmen unsheaths his sword and approaches Eldmia with disdain, telling the boy to surrender peacefully if he wants to stay alive. Crying a lot, the little one refuses the surrender, claiming that his parents are still somewhere in the village. The mercenaries start to laugh loudly and cruelly at the boy's innocence, calling him a complete idiot. With a sadistic smile on his face, the executioner decides to reveal the terrible reality to the poor boy. He tells without any delicacy that the Demon King's army attacked the village and destroyed everything in their path. The mercenary looks deep into Eldmia's tear-filled eyes and says that absolutely all the residents were eliminated. He raises his weapon and warns that, since the boy's parents died, they will be his new masters from that moment on. Eldmia lowers his head dominated by sadness, but grips the hilt of his sword while a mysterious aura emerges around him. Before the mercenary can even react, he is hit by a lethal cut and spits blood without understanding what happened. The man collapses lifeless on the ground, leaving the rest of the gang in complete panic without knowing who did that. They look startled at Eldmia, whose gaze now shines with a frightening and threatening coldness. The sword blade moves in the air independently, tearing through the wind with a hidden power. The boy falls to his knees terrified, realizing that his own arms are being controlled by the sword that moves by itself. The mercenaries retreat with fear, speculating scared if that weapon in the brat's hand wouldn't actually be a cursed sword. They whisper tremulously that, since the village was attacked by the Demon King's army, it makes total sense that a valuable demonic sword had been left behind. A dark voice coming from the weapon echoes in the air, making one of the henchmen tremble with dread as he feels the blade shining near his face. The leader, moved by the greed to obtain such a valuable weapon, threatens his men and orders them to take the sword from the boy at all costs. Even terrified and sweating cold, the henchmen understand they have no choice but to obey the boss. Screaming with all their might to chase away the fear, they charge in to attack Elmia all at once. Desperate with the imminent danger, Asilia yells for the boy to run away from there as fast as possible. A greedy mercenary with an axe runs in front, laughing insanely and planning to keep the mystical sword all to himself. He smiles victoriously, believing his wealth is guaranteed, but is surprised by a red light cutting through his field of vision. In the blink of an eye, the attacker is sliced in half by the swift strike of Elmia, who moves under the control of the mysterious blue energy. Another companion is thrown far away by the impact of the boy's spiritual power, letting out a scream of extreme pain. Under the domain of the mystical sword, the eyes of little Elmia shine with an overwhelming and relentless white light. The leader of the mercenaries watches that massacre scene in a total state of shock, wondering with dread who that monstrous boy is. In the middle of the battle of the past, the leader of the mercenaries is hit by a violent blow and wonders if that weapon is really a cursed sword. Upon observing the scene with attention, Asilia realizes immediately that that weapon possesses no evil power. Despite being wounded, the boss stands up quickly and yells for little Elmia not to take another step. The cowardly villain uses Asilia as a human shield, placing a blade against her neck and threatening to decapitate her if the boy moves. The elf tries to yell for the boy not to listen to what the kidnapper says, but has her mouth covered brutally by the criminal. Internally, the leader knows that he won't really kill her, since she is valuable merchandise, and it would be foolish to ruin his own product. The bandit's real plan is to fake a negotiation to obtain the supposed cursed sword and then assassinate the boy without hesitation. He yells at Elmia, provoking the boy and saying that the person who saved his life is about to die because of him. The boss demands that he hand over the mystical weapon, but is surprised when the boy simply throws the sword in his direction. The blade flies high and falls spinning, sticking into the ground right before the leader of the mercenaries. Completely greedy, the man pushes Asilia to the side and runs fascinated to grab what he believes is his great treasure. He mocks mentally Elmia's stupidity for having handed over his only trump card with such ease. The boss jumps toward the sword, laughing, sure that now it, the elf, and all the riches will be his. However, upon wielding the weapon, nothing happens, and he barely has time to be startled before seeing Elmia surge in the air with another blade, revealing that that was never a magic sword. Back in the present, at the isolated cabin in the mountains, Elmia is sitting on the floor beside his sword after finishing telling the story. The boy lets out a long sigh of exhaustion after reliving those difficult memories of his past. He starts to complain in a funny way with Asilia, indignant at having gone through attacks from the Demon King and bandits at only 8 years of age. The elf observes him with affection and admiration, remembering that the supposed cursed sword never had any real power. She recalls that the little boy managed to deceive the mercenaries entirely with his pure combat ability and tactical intelligence. On that day, the little one used the criminal's own fear and greed to create a perfect distraction. He took advantage of the exact moment when the boss got distracted by the bait to grab the sword of a dead companion and deliver the fatal blow. Asilia remembers having looked at that mysterious boy sitting among the debris of the village, impressed by his mental strength. On that occasion, she asked the boy directly the reason he had risked his own life to save her. Elmia stood up coldly and answered that he hadn't done that to save her. He explained that that was his homeland and that he simply couldn't stand by watching bandits destroy his home. Next, the youth surprised the elf by asking directly if she was a mage capable of using spells. Elmia revealed that he had heard the mercenaries talk about her powers while he was hidden in the closet. Without being able to deny it, Asilia lowered her head sadly and confirmed that the boy's suspicion was real. With a hopeful smile on his face, the boy commented that after all, the gods seemed to really exist. The youth then extended his hand, showing a shining blue sphere of mana, and proposed that the two make an important agreement. Asilia widened her eyes in absolute shock to see the boy holding the key that controlled her magic collar. Elmia offered to free her from slavery in exchange for one simple condition for the next 8 years. He asked if the elf would accept staying by his side and protecting him until he finally became an adult. The boy explained that after the tragedy in the village, he no longer had parents, family, or anyone he could trust. He vented saying that winter was coming and that he needed help to survive far from that destroyed place. Eldmia looked at her with much determination, making it clear that he was willing to do anything to stay alive. Suddenly, a young man's voice in the present calls out his name and brings him back to reality, making him blink surprised. A young man from the village hugs him from behind and asks why he is so distracted, offering to listen if he wants to vent. The friend jokes saying that he heard about the lecture he took from Acelia after the fight with the orphans, leaving Eldmia quite annoyed. The young man explains that that gang was growing and bothering the village a lot, and that seeing Eldmia defeat them with a single blow was sensational. Eldmia grumbles that sounds like a compliment, but the young man laughs and guarantees that thanks to his strength, everyone in the village can finally live in peace. Next, the young man removes a beautiful red apple from one of the fair's crates. With a big smile on his face, he extends the fruit to Eldmia as a sincere gift of appreciation. The young man says the stall owner will figure out the bill later, while the old merchant in the background yells furiously complaining that he is distributing merchandise without permission. The merchant complains that the young man shouldn't fake generosity using someone else's products, amusing the blue-haired boy. Suddenly, a desperate scream calls for Elmia in the middle of the busy street. The boy turns around and sees the little orphan boy with black hair running in his direction with an expression of pure panic. Eldmia remembers having seen that same little boy scared with the other orphans at the gang's hideout. Worried, the blue-haired youth asks what happened while the boy tries to catch his breath to speak. The boy finally manages to yell desperately that some very suspicious people appeared suddenly to try to kidnap them. Eldmia is left completely shocked to hear that unexpected revelation. He remembers how days of peace can disappear in an instant, bringing back the sound of swords clashing and the smell of burning wood. They are painful memories that he simply cannot forget, even if he tries with all his might. The youth recalls the terrible feeling of losing everything in the blink of an eye, without being able to do absolutely anything to stop the tragedy. That is the cruel reality of those who have no power to fight, but luckily the village of Ogwen ended up becoming his second home in the last 3 years. And most importantly of all is that, in that time, Acelia became the most precious person in his life. Thinking of her, Elmia clenches his fists with determination, swearing that he will never let anyone hurt the people he loves. With a serious and furious look, he guarantees that he won't allow them to touch a single finger on her and demands to know where those kidnappers are. Meanwhile, in another part of the village, 2 men surround a girl with red hair and tell her to shut her mouth and accompany them without making a scene. Startled, but without losing her composure, she yells, asking who they are and the reason they are doing that. The henchmen just smile with mockery and say that she doesn't need to ask questions, she just must come with them in silence. A mysterious, hooded man who leads the group questions if that simple girl is really who they are looking for, but the companion guarantees that she is the only redhead who fits the conditions demanded by their master. Upon hearing the details about the characteristics they were looking for, the young woman realizes in panic that they aren't common kidnappers and starts to suspect the group's real identity. The hooded leader gives a malicious smile and orders them to take the girl away from there soon, promising to pay the reward as soon as the service is confirmed. One of the criminals grabs the young woman's arm by force, completely ignoring her screams to let her go. Suddenly, Elbmia surges yelling for them to stop and delivers a precise blow that interrupts the kidnapper's action. The hooded man retreats startled and annoyed to see that sudden intrusion in the middle of his plan. Upon seeing who arrived to save her, the young redhead gives a big smile of relief and calls for Eldmia. The hooded leader demands to know who the intruder is, but Eldmia responds that should be his question while knocking down one of the henchmen with ease. With a cold and threatening look, the protagonist questions what exactly those people think they are doing there. The leader complains mentally for no one having warned him that the girl would have a protector, while Eldmia comments that they are very bold for trying to kidnap someone right in the middle of Ogwen. One of the companions advances furiously against the boy, calling him an abusive brat and setting out to attack. Yet in a few moments, Eldmia knocks out the henchman and, standing before them, demands that they say soon what they are plotting in the village. The protagonist says he is talking directly to the hooded man, who just sighs annoyed for having trusted such incompetent companions. Eldmia explains that it was he who saved that girl and got her a job, so messing with her means buying a direct fight with him. With total confidence, the protagonist challenges the hooded leader and tells him to try to defeat him first if he wants to take her. Feeling insulted by the youth's provocation, the mysterious man unsheathes his sword and tells him not to get too full of himself. The hooded warrior attacks with a swift and ferocious strike, but Eldmia demonstrates impressive reflexes to defend himself. The villain widens his eyes in complete shock upon realizing that the boy managed to dodge his strike so easily. He is even more incredulous to see that a brat of that size was capable of blocking his sword and already prepares an immediate counterattack. But instead of a common punch, Eldmia surprises the adversary by throwing a gust of sand directly into his eyes. The hooded man staggers backward, trying to protect himself, not understanding at what moment the boy managed to grab that sand from the ground. He rubs his face desperately, cursing for having his vision completely blocked by the protagonist's trick. Taking advantage of the perfect opening, Eldmia advances without mercy and lands a devastating punch right in the opponent's face. The impact is so strong that the hooded man is thrown far away and falls rolling along the street ground. Eldmia approaches calmly and comments that the rival's swordsmanship shows that he isn't just any kidnapper, demanding that he start telling every detail about his plans. Fallen and humiliated, the villain grinds his teeth with pure rage and curses the protagonist with much hatred. Taken by the desire for revenge, he looks fixedly at Eldmia and yells furiously that he will end his life in any way. However, before the fight continues, screams of villagers calling attention to the commotion start to echo nearby. A crowd of villagers runs armed toward the location, making the hooded man realize with irritation that now there are too many people in the area. Annoyed for having been delayed by a child, the mysterious man decides that it is time to retreat before he is captured by the residents. Suddenly, a large smokescreen explodes in the middle of the street, leaving everyone present startled and unable to see anything. Coughing a lot because of the dust, Eldmia tries to recover while the villagers arrive worried to know if he is okay. When the smoke finally dissipates, the protagonist realizes disappointed that the hooded leader managed to escape, leaving only the knocked-out companions on the ground. Eldmia then looks coldly at one of the henchmen who stay behind and mocks, saying that they were completely abandoned by the boss. With a frightening look and snapping his fingers, the youth tells the man to tell in detail everything he knows about the hooded subject who just fled. Desperate, the henchmen kneel begging for forgiveness and confess that they only followed orders to find out if the young woman was a noble and lure her to the forest. Eldmia is left quite confused by that revelation and asks what the heck they mean by that story about nobility. The man explains that there is a strong rumor running around out there that a young woman from a noble family destroyed during the war is still alive. Eldmia warns that he doesn't want to know about rumors and demands the identity of the hooded one. But the henchman swears desperately that they also don't know who he is. Eldmia sighs upon realizing that the henchman really isn't lying, while the man trembles with dread, begging for them to believe in his innocence. Without any intention of leaving criminals free, the youth ties the two kidnappers very tightly and warns that he will leave the rest of the work in the hands of the local guards. He then approaches the redhead girl, extends his hand calmly to help her stand up, and asks if she ended up getting hurt during that whole commotion. Still quite startled and trembling, the young woman leans on her chest and comments how terrible it is to think that such dangerous people are walking freely through the village. Worried about her safety, Eldmia tells her to go back soon to the inn to rest, grumbling that the village of Ogwin is getting increasingly dangerous lately. The girl says nothing and just observes him in silence with a thoughtful look while they walk back to a safe place. As soon as they enter the establishment, Eldmia stops suddenly and is surprised to notice a very unusual movement inside the place. He looks around quite shocked, wondering if that is really the quiet inn he knew, since the hall is full of people working actively. At that moment, some children run worried toward Rebbe asking if she is okay after the near kidnapping, and she smiles, guaranteeing that Eldmia arrived in time to save her for good. One of the local boys asks desperately for Reva's help, explaining that they received a last-minute task and are short on people to handle all the work. Quickly, the young redhead analyzes the paperwork and starts to organize the tasks, delegating the functions in an extremely organized way, which leaves Eldmia intrigued with such efficiency. Suddenly, the owner of the inn, Alicia, surges with a big smile on her face and greets happily Eldmia for having shown up around there. She jokes saying she heard that the boy went around giving another lesson to bad guys on the street, but the protagonist changes the subject, saying that that was nothing extraordinary. Elisha then remembers nostalgically that it has been a very short time since he brought that group of homeless children to live in her inn. She praises that the little ones are already working very well and giving new energy to the establishment, but Eldmia reveals that in truth, he had no participation in that change. Before the surprise of the establishment owner, the youth points to Revi and explains that she was the one truly responsible for all that incredible coordination. The inn owner is left amazed, remembering that it was enough to comment on the desire to expand the business for Revi to assume leadership and make everyone work hard together. Alicia continues full of praise, saying that the girl even reorganized the accounting books and reformulated the entire menu, proving to be a brilliant girl who learns things in the blink of an eye. Eldmia starts to find all that genius very suspicious and asks directly to the owner if Revi really knows how to read and write perfectly. The owner agrees that it is unusual for someone of her age to have that ability so developed, but confirms that the young redhead manages to read and write in an impeccable way. She adds that Revis' handwriting and grammar are better than those of any common person, which makes Eldmia immediately remember the rumor he heard from the kidnappers. The youth recalls with precision the conversation about the supposed survivor of a noble lineage destroyed in the war who would be hidden in the region. In the middle of his thoughts, Revi turns around suddenly upon noticing Eldmia's fixed look and silent approach in her direction. Without saying a word, the boy grabs her firmly by the shoulders in a sudden way, leaving the young woman quite startled by that unexpected attitude. He stares at her with much seriousness and asks directly if she really knows who the mysterious hooded man who tried to take her by force is. Quite flushed and uncomfortable with the sudden proximity, she tries to disengage and stammers saying there is no way she can know anything about that. But, totally determined to get clear answers, the protagonist grabs her arm and tells her to accompany him immediately to a reserved place. She lets out a sigh of deep surprise upon being dragged without being able to resist the boy's firmness. Revi tries to ask him to wait, but Eldmia pulls her into a private room and shuts the door hard to ensure total privacy. Alone with him in there, the young woman feels her heart race with nervousness and tries to convince herself that this is just the reflection of the scare she went through earlier. However, she admits to herself that she had already felt that same welcoming sensation upon remembering how she found the boy strong and heroic upon saving her from the bandits. She left completely red and embarrassed upon realizing the nature of her own feelings at that moment alone with him. Trying to push those embarrassing thoughts from her head, she retreats one step while Eldmia calls her in a solemn and concentrated way. Totally uncompensated, the girl stammers asking for some time to breathe and says that she still isn't psychologically prepared for whatever he is going to say. Eldmia stares at her without understanding absolutely anything of that confused reaction and warns that he just wants to ask her one very important question. The boy approaches and asks without mincing words if she is the missing noble that the mercenaries and the hooded man are looking for. He argues that that revelation would perfectly explain the reason such skilled warriors are hunting specifically her through the village. Eldmia repeats the exact words he heard from the criminals about the survivor of a fallen noble house who would be alive and hidden. Revi tries to mask her worry and asks what proof he would have to invent a lie like that. But the protagonist says that the evidence is too obvious to be ignored. He points out that her incredible capacity to manage the inn's business and arrange jobs for the other orphans isn't something common. The youth adds that her ease in dealing with difficult bureaucracies and assuming all the local accounting in an impeccable way gives away her true origin. He states with conviction that no common orphan would be able to do all that unless she had received a top-tier education since childhood. Without exit in the face of so many facts presented, the young redhead shifts her gaze and tries to stammer, saying that all that is just a big coincidence. Eldmia retorts, saying he understands that she must have her personal reasons for hiding, but now that her life is at stake, he needs to know the whole truth. He alerts that if she insists on keeping that secret, there will be no way to stop new attacks and kidnapping attempts from happening in the future. With a sad look, the young woman asks for apologies and says that she still cannot talk about that, making the protagonist sigh and promise that he won't pressure her, but warns that he won't leave those kidnappers unpunished. Quite startled by his serious affirmation, the girl asks worried what exactly he plans to do against the enemy group. The youth reveals that he discovered that the henchman met with the hooded man in a nearby forest and that he plans to go to their hideout to eliminate them for good. Rivi goes into panic upon hearing the protagonist's dangerous idea and asks out loud if he is really planning to face the band of criminals totally alone. Elmia explains that as she wants to keep her secret safe, calling the official guards would only bring unnecessary problems for her, so he orders her to stay well protected in the inn while he resolves that situation once and for all. Rivi tries to alert him that those people are actually part of a dangerous organization of assassins that tends to act in the shadows. Even hearing the warning, Elmia smiles with determination and affirms that he cannot simply ignore criminals who try to kidnap people in broad daylight, putting his friends from Ogwen at risk. With head bowed and feeling guilty for that whole tense situation, the young redhead asks for apology, saying that all that is her fault, but the boy questions the reason for her apologizing. In a gentle way, the protagonist places his hand on Riva's head and asks with tranquility for her to stop blaming herself for things that are totally out of her control. With a firm and composed look, he reinforces that the only guilty ones there are the cowardly criminals who try to abduct her in such a blatant way. Reve is left completely red and surprised by the affection and unexpected support of the boy, who says with sweetness for her not to worry about that anymore. Thumping his own chest with total conviction, the youth assures that he will find a way to resolve personally all the rest of the problem with the pursuers. With a quite confident smile on his face, the protagonist guarantees to her that he is much stronger than people imagine. The scene changes to the forest during a dark night of full moon, where the surviving criminals are gathered around a bonfire in their secret camp. The bandits are fighting badly among themselves, complaining furiously that the kidnapping plan would have worked if that meddling boy from the village hadn't appeared to spoil everything. One of the companions tries to calm the spirits, saying that at least they managed to confirm the girl's identity, but ends up receiving an impatient shout to shut his mouth. Grinding his teeth with pure rage upon remembering the humiliation suffered, the hooded leader swears that he will assassinate that cursed brat who used dirty tricks of sand to blind him in the fight. The other criminal tries to contain the boss's fury, reminding him that they received express orders from a superior named Delta to wait there and that any rash action will ruin the mission completely. Feeling insulted with the sermon, the hooded leader approaches threateningly and warns that if they weren't from the same faction, he would have already eliminated that incompetent right there. Suddenly, a strange noise of branches breaking coming from the bushes all around interrupts the heated discussion and leaves all those present in a complete state of alert. Placing his hand on the hilt of his sword with agility, the hooded one orders coldly that they send someone to check where that suspicious noise came from in the middle of the night. Two of the henchmen approach cautiously of the dense vegetation to check, but are left quite intrigued upon seeing nothing immediately. One of the henchmen returns to report that there is no one there and that it must be just a wild animal, but the leader yells irritated, saying that no beast would come near a bonfire and orders them to investigate properly. Before the henchman can even take one more step, Elmia surges from the shadows in a swift jump, wielding his sword that shines with an intense blue energy. In a swift and completely ruthless attack, the protagonist delivers a precise blow that eliminates the first enemy before he can outline any reaction. The other bandit goes into total panic upon seeing the companion be defeated in such a devastating way before his eyes and yells, desperately asking who the intruder is. Elmia lands coldly on the ground and turns with a focused and intimidating look that shines intensely in the darkness of the forest. Upon recognizing the blue-haired boy, the hooded leader grinds his teeth furious, realizing that the brat really had the audacity to track them to there. The villain points enraged in the direction of the youth and yells with all his might, ordering his men to advance and finish him immediately. With incredible reflexes, Elmia dodges with precision the coordinated attacks, jumping over the lunges and weapons of the opponents. In the middle of his acrobatic jump, he executes a swift movement with the blade and hits squarely the chest of one of the aggressors, making him yell in pain. Upon touching the ground, the youth performs a perfect turn and hits the other adversaries around him with an impressive ease. His blue eyes shine with a cold fury, while a powerful mystical energy starts to emanate in an intense way throughout his body. Concentrating all his physical power, the protagonist advances like a true blue lightning bolt in the direction of the remaining enemies. He projects himself into the air, delivering extremely swift and accurate sword strikes that leave the henchmen without any chance of defense. In the face of such devastating power, the survivors start to retreat terrified upon realizing that they are no match for the boy's strength. In the blink of an eye, Eldmia finishes the combat, knocking down the last opponents who tried to attack him in a coordinated way. Totally shocked with the massacre of his band, the hooded leader stammers without understanding who that demon is, but Eldmia just mocks, remembering that he is the coward who fled running earlier. With a sarcastic smile stamped on his face, the blue-haired boy comments that at least he had the certainty of having found the correct camp. Taken by desperation and wounded pride, the hooded one advances with everything, delivering a violent frontal attack to try to cut the youth. The two swords clash with violence, generating an immense shockwave of blue magic energy that illuminates the entire clearing. During the direct clash of forces, the villain feels the absurd pressure coming from the protagonist's weapon and realizes something extraordinary that leaves him paralyzed with dread. He notes incredulously that the impressive strength of the boy doesn't come from common physical skill, but rather from the direct control of pure magic energy. In that world, normal humans cannot channel magic power in a pure way, needing mages to transform it into mana and knights to refine it into aura to strengthen their bodies. Precisely for that reason, the experienced warrior finds it totally impossible and out of reality that a simple boy manages to perform such a mystical feat. But the protagonist, demonstrating an intense shine in his gaze, just raises his blade that glimmers intensely with the pure magic essence. He then reveals to the opponent that, unlike the other common humans, he possesses the unique ability to utilize magic power directly without needing to refine it. Delivering a vertical strike of extreme potency, Eldmia releases a massive gust of energy that destroys completely the adversary's resistance. The hooded leader falls defeated and bleeding to the ground, while Eldmia approaches calmly and comments that he even admires his audacity of thinking that he would win that fight. The protagonist then puts his weapon away in an indifferent way, deciding that it isn't worth spending more energy on that defeated opponent. Instead of eliminating all those present, he reveals that he intentionally spared the life of a single henchman who now trembles with dread on the ground to get answers. Holding the terrorized man by the collar with quite a lot of firmness, Eldmia makes the poor guy go into absolute despair. With a frightening countenance and a dark look, the boy warns that if he does want to suffer, he must reveal immediately who the true mastermind behind that kidnapping is. He tells the henchman to answer fast, commenting impatiently that if he takes too long to return to the inn, his adoptive sister will give him a huge scolding. However, before the man can say any word, a thunderous roar echoes through the entire forest and a gigantic red dragon surges suddenly right behind them. Eldmia jumps backward, wielding his sword, and is left in absolute shock before that gigantic creature, while the henchman stammers with dread. The ferocious beast advances, roaring with everything in the direction of the boy, who needs to react quickly not to be devoured by the monster. Upon noting that the red monster possesses immense wings, Eldmia realizes that that is in truth a dangerous wyvern. The youth remembers having heard about those flying monsters before, but that is the first time he sees one right before his eyes. He knows that wyverns are known as the fastest means of transport in the world, although maintaining them requires an absurd amount of resources. Upon reflecting that someone capable of taming a beast like that wouldn't be a common criminal, Eldmia concludes that having come immediately to the camp was the best decision. However, a sudden thought makes the protagonist widen his eyes in a sign of extreme alert. He looks around and realizes that there is one more suspicious carriage parked right in the middle of the enemy camp. In a swift movement, he grabs again the henchman he spared and points his sword to his neck in a threatening way. The youth demands to know where the second wyvern of that group is, threatening to end the man's life in case he doesn't speak the truth immediately. Trembling with fear, the prisoner confesses that the captain of the band, a knight known as Delta, had already left flying mounted on the other creature. Eldmia bites his lips with rage upon realizing that the enemies were faster and that their leader had already foreseen that he would come after the group. He realizes horrified that the subordinates were left behind just as a bait to keep him busy, all to distance him from Revi and gain precious time. Meanwhile, poor Revi continues unconscious and completely vulnerable in the hands of her kidnappers. The mysterious Captain Delta carries the passed-out young woman on his shoulders while walking in the direction of his red wyvern, ready to take off. Back at the camp, Eldmia laments deeply upon realizing he fell perfectly into the trap that they prepared for him. Flying high through the skies, Revi finally starts to regain consciousness and asks herself confused where she is, being answered by the man who kidnapped her. She widens her eyes in absolute shock upon looking to the sides and realizing she is flying in the middle of the open sky. The immense red creature beats its wings, cutting through the clouds and advancing rapidly over the forests down below. Upon constating she is mounted on a wyvern, she confronts the kidnapper, who responds in a cold way that he is taking her to a place worthy of her lineage. Indignant, Revi recognizes the man as one of the proud Weaver Knights of the kingdom and questions him if he isn't ashamed to act like a mere kidnapper. But he retorts saying he will use any means necessary to take her back. He says he trusts her intelligence to understand the current situation and advises her to behave well, as it would be a big problem if she plummeted from that height. The winged monster continues its stable and incredibly fast flight, distancing itself increasingly faster from the village of Ogwen. Revi thinks anguished that the people from the village will soon notice her disappearance and will try to help her, but her captor knows that no one would be capable of reaching the beast's flight speed. To Revi's despair, Delta reveals coldly that his group probably didn't leave any witness alive in the village, including the owners of the inn. In absolute panic, the young woman demands to know what he meant by that, and the knight explains that they will forge some bandit attack to cover up totally the traces of the crime. The cruel man affirms he despises leaving any loose end that could compromise the success of his important mission in the kingdom. However, instead of surrendering to the despair, Revi opens a confident smile and yells with conviction that Eldmia will come to save her in any way. Delta lets out a disdainful laugh and remembers he left his best subordinates in charge of watching the forest to contain any type of intrusion. The knight argues that it does not matter how strong the boy seems to be, he is still just a child and it would be impossible to defeat all the guards alone, theorizing that he must already have been eliminated at that point. Revi starts to anguish internally with the possibility, lamenting bitterly not having convinced her friend to stay out of that whole confusion. She condemns herself mentally, thinking she never should have involved the youth in her secrets and problems from the past. He tries to tranquilize her, saying that she will soon forget those people as soon as they return to the royal capital, affirming that the villagers are nothing but commoners without importance whom she will never see again. However, at the exact moment he tells the young woman to stop thinking about that, a bright and bluish light cuts the sky right above their heads. In an unbelievable way, Eldmia surges, falling from high above the clouds like a bright blue meteor, brandishing his sword directly against the winged beast. With a strike from top to bottom of extreme violence, the youth drives his blade deeply into the wyvern's neck, making the creature bleed intensely. The knight Delta goes into total panic, without managing to understand how that boy managed to reach them at such an elevated altitude. But what most terrorizes him is the unbelievable fact of a simple child having been capable of knocking out a monster of that size with a single fatal blow. With the beast losing altitude rapidly, Eldmia lands in an agile way on the creature's back right before his adversary. Without giving time for the knight to recover from the scare, the boy advances, delivering a swift strike that forces Delta to block the blade with all his forces. The impact of the block is immense, making blue sparks shine intensely in the air while they exchange violent attacks of strength. The two start a deadly and extremely dangerous combat, balancing themselves as they can while the wounded wyvern falls in freefall. Delta bites his lips, furious upon realizing Eldmia's audacity, questioning himself if the boy went crazy to the point of risking the life of all in that insane freefall instead of trying to save her in a safe way. Taking advantage of every opening, the protagonist runs along the creature's back and delivers one more swift strike that opens a bloody cut on the opponent. Blocking one more powerful strike, the knight tries desperately to understand how the boy managed to plan that perfect aerial ambush from such an absurd altitude. He looks up suspicious and deduces with firmness that the blue-haired boy certainly must count on the help of some mysterious accomplice. Delta suspects that someone from his own band betrayed them and starts to think that the enemy's real plan is to distract him to allow another person to rescue Revi in secret. With a sadistic smile and calling the opponent a complete fool, the knight starts to emanate a frightening purple aura from his entire body, warning not to be compared to his weak subordinates. In response to the rival's immense power, Eldmia wields his sword and executes swift turns to cut the gusts of dark energy that come in his direction. However, Delta's strike shows itself overwhelming, forcing Eldmia to let out a groan of pain while he is hit by the violent shockwave. Captain Delta recognizes Eldmia's courage for having planned that surprise attack, but warns in an arrogant way that the boy has no chance as he totally overcomes him both in aura control and in combat experience. Delta calls the boy an idiot for trying to challenge him face to face, thinking to himself that he needs to end that soon to land in safety with the young noble. The leader of the knights delivers a lethal blow, yelling for the opponent to die, while Eldmia focuses his gaze on the shining blade that comes in his direction. However, the blue-haired youth takes advantage of the rising sun's shine right behind him to obscure completely the enemy's vision in the middle of the jump. Delta is left totally dazed with the sudden glare and protects his face with his arm without managing to understand what is happening at that instant. The knight realizes startled that the boy calculated perfectly the angle of the dawn to attack face to face and create that crucial opening in his defense. The leader realizes too late that he was the true fool there at the exact moment when Eldmia passes by him, delivering a precise and bloody cut. Without losing a single second, the protagonist tells Revi that they don't have time and tells her to hold on tight, leaving the girl completely confused about what is going to happen. He grabs her firmly in his arms and jumps from the wyvern and fall, making Revi let out a desperate cry of dread while they plummet through the open sky. In a spectacular way, the two fall in safety right onto the back of the second red wyvern that was flying right below them. The henchman who was piloting the creature celebrates, relieved the success of the crazy plan, and asks anxious if now he is finally free from all his criminal accusations. Still trembling, Reverie thanks, moved by the rescue, but soon asks if her friend is okay upon noting something strange in his countenance. It is at that moment that a large bloody cut reveals itself on the side of the youth's shirt, showing that he ended up being hit seriously during the combat. Eldmia laments mentally for having been wounded, recognizing that the leader of the kidnappers really was a formidable warrior capable of counterattacking in a fraction of a second. The blue-haired youth loses his strength and collapses on Revis' shoulder, who goes into total panic, asking him to hold on tight and not close his eyes. While the wyvern flies in the direction of the golden horizon, Revis' anguished cry echoes very loudly through the clouds of that afternoon. Sometime later, Eldmia opens his eyes startled, blinking confused while he tries to situate himself in the place where he is lying. He sits on the bed and looks around intrigued, realizing he is back in the cozy room of his own house. The boy lowers his gaze a bit confused and notes that there is someone right there by his side. He sees his adoptive sister, Acelia, sleeping deeply while holding his hand tight, and realizes she probably spent the whole time taking care of him. Feeling the movement on the bed, the elf's eyelashes start to move and she slowly opens her blue eyes back to reality. Upon seeing he finally awakened, Acelia jumps with relief and thanks the skies for her adoptive brother having awakened from that deep sleep. But the worry soon turns into a lecture and she starts to shake him irritated, asking until when he intends to leave her worried in that way, making the youth ask for apologies clumsily. The tone of rage disappears rapidly and she hugs him with affection, confessing that deep down she is immensely relieved he is well and safe at home. The protagonist returns the warm hug with a sincere smile, apologizing again for having caused so much apprehension to his older sister. Acelia then comments smiling that redhead girl was also dying of worry and came to visit him every day, warning that she probably shouldn't take long to arrive there. Right on time, the door opens and Revi surges on the threshold of the room, stopping completely static upon seeing that her savior is finally awake. Before Eldmia manages to say any word of comfort, the redhead runs desperate and throws herself into his arms amid tears of relief. Next, she starts to deliver various comic punches to his chest while she cries of rage, calling him an idiot for having remained unconscious for 3 long days. Eldmia complains about the hits and says that a simple thank you should come before any aggression, which makes Acelia laugh softly at the fun scene at the back of the room. Changing the subject, the protagonist notices his friend's new clothes and comments that, by the style of the elegant clothing, she must have met with the other nobles. He praises saying that she really looks like an authentic noble now, making the young woman give a proud little smile with the comment. However, The relaxed mood changes when Revi assumes a serious posture and reveals that she needs to have an important conversation with him before leaving for good. With a determined look, the young woman approaches the bed and holds Eldmia's hands with quite a lot of firmness. She looks into his eyes and makes a direct proposal, asking if he would accept accompanying her to the royal capital. Without hesitating for a single second, the protagonist simply refuses the invitation, which leaves Revi irritated, asking him to at least pretend he thought about the proposal for a moment. The boy smiles and explains that he appreciates the offer, but has a very important goal to fulfill and needs to focus on becoming infinitely stronger to reach it. Revi tries to argue, saying that the knights of the court could teach him how to fight for real, but the boy affirms with conviction that his sister Asilia is the only master he needs. He remembers proud how astonishing the true power of a highly qualified elf mage like his sister is to justify his choice. Revi hesitates for an instant, but soon retorts with a tricky question, questioning what he would do if there were someone even stronger than Asilia available in the capital. The blue-haired youth finds the idea difficult to believe, but his train of thought is interrupted by the sound of heavy steps that start to echo at the entrance of the house. He lets out a relaxed laugh, arguing that a powerful big shot of that level would never waste time teaching a common boy like him in the capital. Suddenly, an imposing voice echoes right behind his back, saying that he wouldn't be so sure of that, revealing the presence of a gigantic warrior in a shining armor. Eldmia's eyes widen in absolute shock upon realizing the frightening proximity of that mysterious figure right behind himself. He jumps instinctively backward, sweating cold upon constating he was completely caught by surprise and didn't manage to feel that man's approach in any way. Entering immediately on guard to protect the redhead friend, the boy demands to know who the intruder is, but Revi tries to calm him, saying that it is all fine. She takes one step forward with tranquility and greets the warrior in a respectful way, revealing that she already knows him by calling him Sir Ekaf. The blonde-haired knight sketches a gentle smile and says he is relieved to see that the young noble is safe and sound, while Eldmia starts to connect the dots in his head. Revi presents herself officially with her true title and reveals that that imposing man in truth came in search of the great Margrave Lagunis Rienda Revian. Upon listening to that name of extreme military prestige and discovering the friend's true lineage, the protagonist is left completely open-mouthed, not managing to believe that he is before such important people. Upon analyzing the map of the region, Eldmia is left perplexed upon noting the immensity of Revrian's territory in comparison to the small village of Ogwin, even knowing that those gigantic lands were already invaded by the feared Demon King's army. The protagonist looks at his friend with a totally new look, struggling to believe that that humble girl who worked at the inn belongs to a lineage of Margraves so influential. He realizes that Revi is a figure of extreme importance in the kingdom's politics, surpassing by far everything that the local rumors used to report. Sir Ekaf then narrows his purple eyes, fixing an analytical and extremely serious look directly upon the blue-haired youth. The imposing knight approaches in an intimidating way and asks directly if he is the lad called Eldmia. He comments, surprised that the one responsible for defeating the infamous Dandel is just a child, and asks if it is really true that a youth of that age already manages to manipulate aura. With a quite sharp tone, Eldmia responds immediately that his skills aren't the knight's business, leaving Revi desperate with such audacity. The lad yells in rage that he simply doesn't like the newcomer and questions him where he was when Revi ran in danger of death, irritated for seeing him act like a zealous protector only now. However, Revi interrupts him, yelling that he is completely mistaken and that whole disastrous situation was, in truth, the fault of his own errors. Sir Ekaf explains calmly that that is a purely political issue of the kingdom, and affirms in a categorical way that a common outsider shouldn't meddle in those affairs of state. Eldmia grinds his teeth, irritated with the arrogance of the response, but the knight soon continues his speech, raising an important point. The legendary warrior surprises everyone upon proposing that the situation would change completely in figure if the youth accepted becoming his personal disciple. Revi smiles, animated, and reveals that she brought the master precisely to make that proposal, explaining that he was impressed upon hearing about the boy's feats and wanted to adopt him as an official apprentice. The young woman then presents formally the man as Sir Eke Tushin Okitor, the third sword of the king and one of the most powerful warriors of the entire royal capital, besides having been a great friend of her late father. Sir Ekaf assumes a serious countenance again, and reveals that he already investigated thoroughly all of Eldmia's past before coming to there. He comments that he knows that the lad went around hunting local criminals in the outskirts and that he used to leave clear warnings so that no one would dare to anger him. The knight touches the most painful point upon mentioning that Eldmia lost his biological parents to the Demon King's army 3 years ago and that his only current desire is to accumulate power to avenge himself. He asks if that almost obsessive determination to get stronger is born purely from the trauma of having seen his former family be destroyed by evil. Taken by a sudden fury in the face of the provocation, the protagonist propels his body forward with absurd speed and precision. Eldmia delivers a violent punch against the knight's face, yelling with all his soul that that arrogant man knows absolutely nothing about his pain. However, Sir Icaf extends his armored hand and manages to block the strike with an impressive ease, generating a strong shockwave in the air. The master takes the opportunity to give a lesson, warning the youth to never let the emotions dictate his actions, since that makes his attack sloppy and extremely easy to predict. But Eldmia doesn't give up and uses his other free hand to hold firmly the opponent's arm in an unexpected way. Using that support, the lad jumps into the air with agility and projects a powerful kick directly against the experienced warrior's guard. The veteran widens his eyes, slightly surprised with the astute reaction and the speed of reasoning of that child in full combat. He is forced to use his other arm to contain the impact of the strike, feeling the concentrated energy that emanates from Eldmia's physical attack. Upon realizing that he managed to break the opponent's perfect defense and connect the strike, the blue-haired boy sketches a provocative and victorious smile. But his smile lasts little as he realizes a swift movement that leaves him in a state of maximum alert. Sir Ekaf praises the lad's audacity, calling the attack a good strike, while he prepares to counterattack in a subtle way. With a firm push, the knight throws Eldmia back to the ground and comments that he would love to continue testing his skills for more time if the situation permitted. However, the warrior points to the open wound on the side of the lad's body and warns in a pragmatic way that he clearly doesn't have the physical conditions to continue fighting. Eldmia yells with rage, saying that if the man is so powerful like that, he should have come to save her much earlier and that no royal title has value if the bearer isn't present at the most critical moment. Instead of getting irritated, Sir Ekaf agrees solemnly with the criticism, admitting with regret that it does matter the size of his reputation. In the end of the accounts, the warriors always fail to protect many important things. He reflects on how, even at that exact moment, countless people may be clamoring for help in distant villages attacked by monsters, and recognizes that it is simply impossible for a single man to save everyone. The knight then walks to the fallen lad and places his armored and comforting hand upon his shoulder in a very serious way. With a focused look and full of determination, he affirms that the only real way to avoid more tragedies and save everyone is to annihilate once and for all the Demon King's army. The experienced warrior explains that to perform that grandiose military feat, the kingdom needs to gather the maximum possible of talented and promising warriors like him. He promises solemnly that he can train the youth to make him stronger than anyone, inviting him to become a sword of the kingdom so that together they can finally eradicate the forces of evil. Eldmia bites his lips in absolute silence, processing that overwhelming proposal that touches directly his greatest desire for revenge. Sometime later, under the bright light of midday, the lad walks reflective along a grassy trail in the outskirts of the village. Suddenly, he raises his gaze, surprised upon noting a familiar figure standing further ahead on the path. He spots his adoptive sister, Asilia, wearing a beautiful white dress under the shade of a large tree and murmurs her name softly. The elf turns with a warm and understanding smile, asking directly if he really decided to leave the village. She confesses that she already felt that that day would arrive from the moment he met the young redhead, although she admits with affection that she didn't expect to have to say goodbye to him so soon. The lad asks for the sister's understanding, explaining that he is willing to make any sacrifice necessary to become as strong as possible and reach his goal. He lowers his head with deep respect and thanks from the bottom of his heart for the wonderful 3 years that they spent together, saying that that time was more than enough for him to feel grateful. Asilia continues to listen to him in silence with a serene and proud look stamped on her face. Suddenly, she calls him by his affectionate nickname, making the blue-haired lad widen his eyes of surprise. With an extremely radiant smile and arms wide open, the elf asks affectionately for her adoptive brother to give her one last hug before leaving for his great journey. The lad hesitates for a brief instant with the affectionate request of his older sister. Beneath the welcoming shade of the massive tree, Eldmir returns his sister's tight hug, silently sealing their temporary farewell. Shortly after, an imposing carriage begins to roll down the dirt road, cutting through the beautiful green hills toward the kingdom's capital. Inside the carriage, the elegant gold-fringed earring that now shines on the MC's ear draws immediate attention. Revi notices the new accessory and asks, surprised, if he has always worn that gold earring, causing the young man to offer a slight smile as he looks at her. Eldmia explains it was a gift from his sister Acelia, mentioning it is an amulet used in a traditional elven ritual to ensure a sacred promise is kept. Upon hearing about a solemn promise, the red-headed young woman blushes immediately and stammers, asking what exactly he promised the elf. The young man jokes that it is a top-secret matter, leaving his friend even more curious and annoyed as the carriage pulls away under the caring gaze of Acelia atop the hill. Feeling she has fulfilled her role as a protector, the elf smiles with serenity while a soft breeze blows through her long blonde hair amidst the nature surrounding her. After a long journey, the carriage finally arrives at the kingdom's capital and parks in front of the luxurious palace that serves as the home for the influential Ogator family. In the mansion's training yard, a blonde young woman standing with her back turned expresses all her indignation and disbelief that her father accepted as a disciple the very guy who dared to attack him head-on. Clenching her fist tightly until she crushes the paper in her hand, she asks irritably what her master was thinking when he made such an absurd decision. She rests her hand on the hilt of her training sword while muttering the name, Eldmia Iga, with visible hostility. The blonde young woman turns around, revealing a defiant and focused look, mentally swearing she will show the new intruder just how terrifying the power of the Ogator family truly can be. Meanwhile, the luxurious vehicle calmly enters the beautiful tree-lined paths of the great royal estate. During the final stretch, Eldmia asks if the country is really divided between the royalist and noble factions, to which Reverie replies that this political conflict was exactly what motivated her attempted kidnapping. The young woman explains with regret that she is the only survivor of her lineage and that, because she is a minor, the rebel nobles wanted to kidnap her under the guise of protection so they could freely manipulate her family's entire influence and territories. She adds that the kidnappers intended to use her as a mere pawn on a political chessboard to gain an advantage in the power struggle against the defenders of the crown. Curious, the MC asks her why she didn't seek help from the royalists from the start, since her family belonged to that faction, and why she preferred to hide in Ogwen, pretending to be just an ordinary orphan. With an extremely serious and determined expression, Reverie reveals she made that drastic decision because she wants to be the only one responsible for rebuilding her noble house from the ground up. She makes an enigmatic comment stating that people simply love dramatic, heroic stories, which leaves Eldmia somewhat intrigued by his friend's reasoning. The girl argues that if she had simply run to beg for the royalists' help, she would be seen only as the pitiful survivor of a ruined family, which wouldn't help her win the respect and popular support she so desperately needs. But she envisions a totally different scenario if she could survive on her own and reappear triumphantly only upon reaching adulthood. Ravi dreams of the moment when the heir to the noble Margrave, who gave his life for the country, would return from the shadows to retake her family's throne and swear absolute loyalty to the kingdom before everyone. With a confident smile, she highlights that this triumphant return would not only immensely strengthen the royalist position, but would also be the ideal narrative to win the hearts of the entire populace. Eldmia admits he understands her point of view, but insists that the plan is still extremely reckless, and questions if it wouldn't have been infinitely safer to ask the royalists to hide her in secret until she grew up. Sir Ekaf interrupts the conversation, commenting that he thought exactly the same way, but reveals that the young noblewoman only sent her demands in secret and adamantly refused to reveal where she was hiding. Ravi laughs awkwardly, remembering how she proudly insisted she needed to overcome those difficulties on her own to prove her worth, though she admits affectionately that, in the end, it was Eldmia who saved her life. The MC smiles gently and comments that, at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is that she is alive and completely safe now. While they talk, the carriage passes through the main gates and approaches the front facade of the magnificent mansion. Sir Ekaf pulls the reins of the horses and calmly warns the two young people that they are about to arrive at their destination. With a soft creak of the wooden wheels against the stone pavement, the vehicle finally comes to a complete stop in the mansion's courtyard. The imposing facade of the Agatorf residence reveals itself in all its glory before the newcomers. The Master Knight steps down from his position on the driver's bench to properly welcome the important visitors. Revi comments with nostalgia about how long it had been since her last visit to that property, while Eldmia admires the place, impressed by the luxury of Sir Ekof's residence. The red-headed young woman asks cheerfully how Cheryl is doing, causing the great knight's face to take on a slightly worried expression as he replies that his daughter is fine, but dealing with some recent problems. The master explains awkwardly that his daughter seems to be going through a rebellious phase, at the exact moment that firm, heavy footsteps begin to approach the carriage door. He continues saying that the girl has become somewhat stubborn and impatient in recent days, when suddenly a gloved hand grabs the carriage handle quite roughly. The door is yanked open with extreme force by Cheryl, who glares at the vehicle's occupants with a clearly hostile and furious expression. Her intense purple eyes focus immediately on the blue-haired guy with a fury that makes the atmosphere instantly tense. Eldmia gulps and looks up, confused by such unprovoked aggression, while Revi recoils, startled, beside him. The MC furrows his brow and asks her directly who she thinks she is to act in such a rude manner. Instead of answering, the blonde young woman screams furiously, pointing at the guy, and demands to know if he is really the intruder named Eldmia. Sir Ekaf reprimands her, ordering her to greet their illustrious guest first, causing Cheryl to instantly change her tone to greet Reverie with extreme courtesy, which leaves the redhead feeling quite awkward. Immediately after, she turns back to the MC, with her face red with rage, and challenges him at the top of her lungs to an immediate duel as punishment for having dared to insult her dear father's honor. Faced with such chaos right upon their arrival, the great knight lets out a long sigh, covering his face in embarrassment, while Eldmia stares at him with a totally discouraged expression. Her father tries to smooth over the situation by lying blatantly, saying it was he who planned that friendly duel to help them get along. But Eldmia thinks to himself that the man's tired sigh totally gave away his ruse. But instead of refusing, the MC snaps his fingers with a challenging smile and comments that he doesn't mind, since his body could really use a good stretch after sitting in the carriage for so long. Demonstrating immense confidence, the blue-haired young man officially accepts the duel challenge with an excited smile on his face. Moments later, the two opponents take their positions face-to-face in the mansion's large training yard, wielding their training swords under the watchful eyes of the spectators. Revi asks, concerned, if it wouldn't be better to intervene and stop the fight since they had just met. But Surekov just crosses his arms calmly and states that children learn much faster through the physical experience of combat. Deep down, the real reason Sir Ekaf accepted the duel is that no one can handle Cheryl when she decides to be that stubborn, which leaves him visibly embarrassed. The knight knows perfectly well that once his daughter enters that state of obstinate fury, she simply refuses to listen to anyone else's advice. Without wasting time, Cheryl plants her feet on the ground and advances at high speed toward Eldmia with an extremely aggressive combat stance. The two training swords clash with force, generating an intense blue spark that lights up the training yard while the young people measure their strength. Gritting her teeth in anger, close to her rival's face, Cheryl snaps that he has a lot of nerve showing up there after insulting her father and tells the boy to turn around and head back to his sleepy little village. Eldmia yells back that it was her own father who invited him to be his disciple and warns that if she isn't happy about it, she is the one who should disappear from there. The two force their blades together in a violent friction until the weapons separate abruptly amidst a bright flash. They begin to exchange extremely fast and coordinated blows, filling the air with the metallic sound of constant blocks and attacks. Cheryl recoils lightly to readjust her combat stance and prepare an even stronger assault. She delivers a fast horizontal slash, but the MC demonstrates great reflexes by jumping backward with extreme agility to escape the training blade. With a focused look full of mischief, the heir to the Okator family decides to raise the level of the dispute to test the real limits of the blue-haired boy. She spins her body, delivering a powerful aerial attack, forcing Eldmia to duck quickly near the ground to avoid being hit squarely. Cheryl cracks a confident smile upon realizing that the opponent would dodge in that way, exactly as she had predicted in her combat strategy. She calculates coldly that by dodging while dropping his torso like that, the boy's body would be temporarily stuck in a vulnerable position close to the ground. Taking advantage of the perfect opening, the blonde brings her training sword down at full speed, screaming that she finally caught him. With a victorious look, she announces that this is the end of the line for him and puts all her strength into the finishing blow. However, Eldmia reacts with frightening agility, sliding his foot across the ground in a fraction of a second. Instead of trying to block the direct blow, the young man slides spectacularly underneath the rival's sword trajectory, penetrating her guard completely. In a lightning-fast movement, he positions the tip of his training sword millimeters from Cheryl's neck, stopping the attack at the exact moment to deal the fatal blow. The blonde young woman freezes completely in absolute shock upon realizing she was totally outclassed and that her opponent's blade is pointed directly at her. She widens her eyes, unable to understand what just happened, completely paralyzed by the boy's relentless speed. Cheryl focuses her trembling gaze on Eldmia, whose eyes glow intensely while a powerful, mystical blue energy emanates from his wooden sword. The girl trembles in fear upon feeling the immense combat pressure released by the MC, realizing the absurd difference in level between them. Eldmia simply retracts his training weapon naturally and gives a light pat on Cheryl's head with the wooden sword, complaining about the fatigue in a comical way. With a totally bored and indifferent expression, the blue-haired young man asks if she is finally satisfied with the result of that dispute. Cheryl yells, extremely frustrated and blushing, accusing him of mocking her and demanding he finish the fight properly, to which the boy retorts that if he did it for real, she would end up hurt. He clarifies with seriousness that he never intended to insult Sir Akoff's honor, adding that if there is anyone there who doesn't want to be made a fool of, it is him. The boy states with conviction that he risked absolutely everything to come to the capital and get stronger, ensuring he has no intention of returning to his village until he manages to accomplish his great mission. Next, he opens a wide, friendly smile, extending his hand to the girl and saying he's looking forward to them working well together from now on. Cheryl stares at the opponent's extended hand with a mix of surprise and reluctance, still processing the boy's determination. Reluctant, she slowly extends her own gloved hand to accept the greeting hesitantly. However, she soon recovers her arrogant posture, slapping his hand and shouting that she bets a hick like him will run away from there in less than 3 days, which starts a new, noisy argument between the two. Watching the fun scene from afar, Revi comments with a smile that the two are extremely alike, and Sir Ekef agrees, laughing, adding that both share the same deep hatred of defeat. The Great Master comments that he is eager to see how this dynamic will unfold, while Eldmia raises his fist with fervor and swears he will be infinitely stronger from then on. Later, already inside his new quarters at the mansion, the MC's hands press firmly against the room's wooden floor. He begins to perform an exhaustive routine of push-ups alone, focused on maintaining his physical training even after a long day of travel. Early the next day, practical outdoor training begins under the attentive and rigorous supervision of Sir Ekoff on the estate. The young man delivers powerful blows with his wooden sword against the rotating training dummies, under the analytical gaze of the master who evaluates every movement he makes. Under the intense summer heat, evidenced by the sound of cicadas in the trees, the boy runs while dragging a gigantic rock tied to his body to strengthen his physical endurance. At nightfall, he collapses exhausted on his bed, barely having the strength to move after another day of extreme efforts. Time begins to pass quickly through the palace windows, showing the smooth transition from the green leaves of summer to the orange hues of autumn. Under the tree canopies painted red and orange, Eldmia and Cheryl continue dueling intensely every day under Sir Akaf's mentorship. The MC trains tirelessly amidst sweat and fatigue, improving his control and speed with each passing week. Soon, the cold of winter settles in the region, and white snow begins to cover the dry branches of the trees outside the window. Even with the freezing cold, a bare foot steps firmly onto the snowy ground, emanating an intense warm aura of blue magic. Eldmia trains shirtless in the middle of a forest covered in deep snow, concentrating his pure magical energy to warm his body and strengthen his technique. He lets out a puff of warm air that condenses in the extreme cold, with a look of absolute focus that not even the worst of blizzards would be able to shake. Eventually, the harsh winter comes to an end, and the first flowers of spring begin to bloom timidly on the tree branches. The budding of the sprout under the sunny blue sky marks the complete passage of a full year of intense and constant dedication. Back on the bedroom's wooden floor, the hands performing the push-ups now appear much firmer and calloused by the arduous, uninterrupted training. It all begins in Eldmia's room, where he is training hard doing push-ups until he is interrupted by a shout calling his name, telling him to hurry up. Cheryl simply invades the room at once, leaving the guy annoyed that she didn't knock on the door before entering. She orders her companion to get ready quickly because the best missions of the day will be taken if they are late. Eldmia warns that he is already getting ready and asks her to wait just one more moment. Meanwhile, in an isolated wooden cabin in the middle of the forest, a suspicious group gathers. One of the men holds a bag overflowing with gold coins with a smile of satisfaction. The band of criminals celebrates their recent big heist, commenting that the reward this time was a true jackpot. The group's leader, a muscular red-haired man, laughs loudly and brags that going to the royal capital was well worth it because of the number of wealthy people there. He plans to pull just 2 more heists before they leave for good, anticipating that the Adventurers Guild will soon start moving against them. The boss continues laughing while saying he loves this job since the victims just beg for their lives and leave all the money behind. However, his laughter is interrupted by a mysterious hooded voice that calls them trash. Firm footsteps echo through the cabin as the mysterious person criticizes the fact that they steal from others and still brag about it with such pride. In the blink of an eye, Cheryl reveals herself by pointing her sharp blade directly at the bandit leader's neck. The boss falls into complete despair, not understanding where she came from or how long she had been lurking there. The henchmen panic and ask if she came to carry out an elimination mission for the guild. Cheryl tells everyone to shut their mouths and yells for Eldmia to finish off the rest of the group once and for all. Realizing she is not alone, the criminals try to organize quickly to protect the cabin's doors and windows. Irritated by the delay, the blonde young woman complains, asking her companion to hurry. That is when one of the bandits looks up and freezes to see the blue-haired guy crouched on the ceiling, observing everyone coldly. The henchman goes into shock, realizing the danger was already right on top of him. Eldmia jumps from above with extreme agility and takes him down immediately with a quick strike. The other criminals scream in desperation when they see the intruder and advance with their swords to try to attack him. But the MC moves like a blue blur, cutting down the adversaries one by one with extreme precision and speed. A huge bandit tries to strike him, but Eldmia dodges easily and moves for the counterattack. With a quick movement of his feet, Cheryl also jumps into action to help in the combat. She delivers a powerful kick right to the face of one of the opponents who is trying to surround them. Eldmia advances mercilessly with his eyes glowing in an intense shade of blue. With a precise and brutal slash, the guy takes down the last major opponent who remains standing. The man collapses unconscious on the floor before the horrified gaze of the leader who remains under the aim of Cheryl's sword. In just a few moments, the entire cabin is filled with defeated bandits, while Eldmia sheaths his weapon calmly. Desperate and trembling with fear, the bandit boss raises his hands, begging them to spare his life. He promises to hand over all the accumulated gold in exchange for his survival, leaving Cheryl with an expression of deep disgust. Eldmia removes his hood and comments that a despicable guy like him isn't even worth the effort of being killed. The young man explains that he will only spare him because he needs to take prisoners back as proof of the completed mission for the guild. However, the MC cracks his knuckles and warns that, in return, he will give him an unforgettable beating so he never forgets the lesson. With a scary smile, he tells the criminal to always remember that he was defeated by Eldmia Iga. Immediately after, an agonizing scream of pain echoes throughout the forest from the cabin. Sometime later, the duo returns victorious to the busy Adventurers Guild in the royal capital. The receptionist confirms the successful completion of the elimination mission and hands over a bag full of gold coins as a reward. Eldmia accepts the payment with a proud smile on his face, thanking her for her cooperation. The guy warns that it is already time for them to go, but realizes that Cheryl is completely distracted, analyzing a mission flyer. Cheryl reveals that she is choosing tomorrow's job, but Eldmia finds it strange and remembers that the academy holidays start the next day. A Upon looking at the paper closely, the young man realizes it is another request for bandit elimination and comments that this type of problem has increased a lot lately. The blonde explains that it is a large-scale mission that needs to recruit about 60 people after the failure of the first attempt. Elmia questions if her father, Sir Ekaf, will not oppose this, but she smiles mischievously, saying she already has a great idea to convince him. Knowing the stubborn temperament of his partner, Elmia starts to sweat coldly, imagining that her great idea is just to threaten to run off to battle anyway. While the two talk at the guild's exit, they do not realize they are being closely observed by a mysterious figure in a second-floor window. The hooded person asks the guildmaster if that one down there is really the young man everyone talks about. The guildmaster confirms, explaining that the boy is a rookie adventurer who appeared out of nowhere like a comet about a year ago. He adds that the young man crushes any opponent without the slightest mercy and reveals that is exactly why he became known to everyone by the nickname Mad Dog. The man in the black hood states that the boy's skills are truly impressive, while the guildmaster listens attentively with a thoughtful look. With his face hidden by the shadows of his hood, the mysterious man narrows his eyes, focusing his attention on the conversation about the prodigy. He repeats the nickname Mad Dog in a low tone, appearing extremely interested in the potential of the blue-haired young warrior. 2 days later, in a vineyard on the outskirts of the royal capital, a large adventurers' camp is set up to begin the new suppression mission. Observing the movement around the campfire, Cheryl asks her companion if the scowling man further ahead is the client who hired them. Elmia looks in the indicated direction and confirms that is Baron Papera, commenting on the rumors that he came from the countryside and bought his noble title with money. The young man finds the situation quite curious and reflects in silence on how the man managed to buy his social position so easily. A fat, smiling man takes the lead of the group to explain the mission details, announcing joyfully that almost all the recruits have already arrived. He points in the direction of a nearby forest and reveals that the band of 20 armed bandits who attacked Baron Papera is hidden in some ruins around there. The spokesperson presents a simple strategy, suggesting that everyone form a single line to surround the forest and advance together as soon as he gives the signal. Elmia thinks that idea of marching in a straight line is extremely absurd and starts to question the plan mentally. He realizes immediately that attempting such an open advance in a flat, exposed area like that would be a very serious tactical mistake. Other adventurers also revolt at the same moment, shouting irritably that it is madness to advance blindly without even knowing how the enemies will react. Cheryl turns to the MC seeking an opinion, and he agrees immediately that he is thinking exactly the same thing as she is. The duo begins to suspect that the arrogant Baron is planning something very sinister behind that entire disorganized operation. The spokesperson gestures, trying to calm the heated spirits, insisting that it was just a suggestion and not an absolute order, which makes the warriors even more furious. He tries to appeal to the adventurer's pride, saying that the Baron wants to resolve everything quickly, and that mere bandits shouldn't be a match for them. With a wide, manipulative smile, the man announces that the Baron has a special proposal to encourage the group. He promises an extra reward of 5 silver coins for the warriors who lead the attack with bravery, making everyone's jaws drop at the amount. Greedy for the offered reward, the men begin to grip their sword hilts with firmness and renewed determination. Totally motivated by easy money, the warriors begin shouting that the bandits will pay dearly for having dared to attack the Baron and demand to march immediately. The spokesperson lets out a wicked, victorious smile upon realizing his manipulation plan worked perfectly on the crowd. Elmia watches that whole ridiculous scene from afar and realizes immediately what their true game is. He stretches and comments out loud that those who don't need the extra coins have no obligation to go along, warning that he and Cheryl will act on their own. The MC cracks a challenging smile and questions if there is any problem with the two of them acting totally independently of the rest of the group. The organizer starts to sweat nervously and tries to mask the tension with an awkward laugh, saying that things aren't quite like that. The man gulps and tries desperately to find an excuse to stop the duo of prodigies from moving away from the front line. He glances sideways at Baron Papera, who remains sitting on a log with an expression of extreme dissatisfaction and impatience. The noble turns his gaze away with a serious expression, clearly bothered by the blue-haired boy's audacity in challenging the plan. With no other way out to avoid raising further suspicions, the spokesperson ends up giving in with a fake smile and allows the two to act on their own. But even before he can finish speaking, Eldmia and Cheryl are already walking calmly toward the forest. While they walk under the shade of the trees, Cheryl comments that mass advance tactic seems a lot like a trap, and the guy agrees fully with her. Eldmia wonders what the real goal of that whole setup would be, since there's no doubt that the Baron is hiding something. The blonde confesses that she also doesn't know what they intend to gain from this, but warns that the situation is extremely dangerous. She concludes with seriousness that if the other warriors continue following that ridiculous plan, all of them will end up dead in the forest. In the dense and gloomy interior of the woods, silence hides terrible dangers that await the invaders at every step. Hidden among the trees and shrubs, several enemy archers are already positioned strategically for a perfect ambush. One of the bandits whispers to his companion that two rookie adventurers decided to separate from the main group to explore the area alone. With a sadistic smile beneath his mask, he comments that the two were unlucky, but adds that the idiots who are coming behind silver coins are also marching straight to their deaths. Suddenly, extremely fast and light footsteps break the forest silence amidst the dry leaves on the ground. The archer continues bragging about how the last group that tried to attack them ended up on their knees begging for mercy. However, an intense blue glow emerges from nowhere in the air with the swift draw of a magical sword. The bandit still lets out one last laugh, imagining the pathetic faces the new targets would make when cornered. But before he can react, a deadly advance breaks through the vegetation in a fraction of a second. Eldmia appears like a blue bolt of lightning cutting through the air, completely surprising the enemies who were on watch. The bandits scream in desperation upon realizing they suffered an extremely fast surprise attack on their own territory. One of them recognizes the blue-haired guy and panics upon noticing that the rookie who walked alone already eliminated his companions. Without giving them time to breathe, the MC plants his feet on the ground and advances again with absurd speed. He jumps, delivering a powerful strike against a swordsman, while the remaining archer tries desperately to aim his arrow at him. Eldmia's blade shines with the devastating blue fury, while he channels his magical power to end the ambush in the blink of an eye. Eldmia finishes off another opponent with an extremely fast vertical strike, spreading an intense blue energy all around. Without losing his rhythm, the blue-haired young man advances swiftly against the archer who was trying to distance himself to aim. The shooter tries to remain calm and fires a precise arrow at the invader who is approaching at high speed. But Eldmia's gaze remains totally cold and focused, showing he has already predicted the projectile's trajectory. With an agile, dodging movement, the boy avoids the arrow with ease and continues his relentless assault. The archer falls into absolute despair upon realizing that his entire defense was overcome by just one man. In an instant, the opponent is knocked out, and Eldmia swears to himself that he will also save the other adventurers who were blinded by the Baron's promise of gold. He cracks a confident smile and comments proudly that he just came up with a very good plan to resolve that whole situation. Cheryl, however, stares at him with an expression of total exhaustion and skepticism upon hearing about the plan. Looking at his blood-covered hand while holding his sword, the MC admits with humor that maybe calling that a plan is a slight exaggeration on his part. Around him, a pile of defeated bandits lies on the forest floor, evidencing the scale of the combat he just won alone. He breathes deeply to recover his breath after the intense effort, satisfied with the result of his action. The boy calculates that by making so much noise and defeating so many enemies, the news will soon reach the Baron, preventing him from sending more innocent adventurers into that trap. Eldmia looks at the sky through the tree canopy and hopes mentally that Cheryl also found some useful clue. He knows perfectly well that his partner can take very good care of herself, and decides it is time to retreat before enemy reinforcements show up there. Before leaving, the young man gives light taps on the head of the only conscious bandit left to make him wake up. The man grumbles in pain and opens his eyes slowly, still a bit dazed from the blow he took. With a friendly but extremely threatening smile, Eldmia warns that the two are going to have a very productive conversation from now on. Meanwhile, in another part of the forest, Cheryl finds a mysterious wooden hatch hidden level with the ground and decides to open it. She observes the darkness of the staircase descending underground and finds it very strange that someone would have dug a basement in the middle of nowhere. Curious, the blonde young woman starts to descend the wooden steps with cautious steps. Cheryl covers her nose in disgust upon smelling an extremely strong and unpleasant odor exuding from the depths of the place. Suddenly, the tip of her boot hits something wet and soft on the dark floor, making her stop immediately. She feels a chill upon realizing she just kicked what looked like a human hand in the middle of the darkness. Her purple eyes widen in absolute shock and dread at the terrible suspicion that crosses her mind. Upon looking closer, she is met with the macabre pile of bloody bodies hidden down there. Back at the interrogation in the forest, Elmia questions the prisoner about what exactly his group was collecting there. The wounded criminal confesses with difficulty that they were collecting the bodies of the deceased people. The bandit explains that they were the corpses of the adventurers killed during the first hunting mission, leaving Elmia extremely shocked. The MC loses patience, grabs the man by the collar, and demands to know why the heck they would do something so repulsive. In the basement, Cheryl wonders what the motive could be for hiding all that there, at the exact moment that an armed silhouette appears at the top of the stairs. Heavy footsteps begin to descend the wooden staircase, breaking the tense silence of the underground. The heir to the Ogator family immediately notices the approach of the threat and prepares for the worst. She glances up the pile of corpses upon realizing the enemy is getting closer and closer to her. With an expression of deep rage, Cheryl turns in his direction, willing to fight until the end. While the confrontation unfolds in the underground, the forest around the cabin remains in a deathly silence. At the camp under the sunny sky of the vineyard, the adventurers continue preparing anxiously for battle. The warriors grip their swords with greedy smiles on their faces, without imagining the real danger that awaits them. The spokesperson approaches Papera and warns that everything is ready, asking if they can finally start the planned attack. The Baron agrees with a dark smile, thinking to himself that he will order his men to personally eliminate any survivors remaining from the battle. He savors the idea that that mysterious person's plan will finally work until a guard calls him desperately. Papera finds his presence there strange and questions the reason for him not being in the forest, to which the soldier replies that they have just suffered a major emergency. The noble turns completely pale and breaks into a cold sweat upon hearing that the blue-haired boy ruined his entire ambush. He grinds his teeth with overwhelming fury upon realizing his perfect plan was completely frustrated by a boy. Trying to contain the damage, the Baron orders the spokesperson to stall the adventurers somehow and keep them waiting there at the camp for now. In the dark basement, Cheryl regrets having to fight without knowing the opponent's total strength, but draws her weapon, determined not to retreat. She firms her hands on the hilt of her sword, which begins to emanate an intense fire energy around the blade. With a wild smile and eyes shining with excitement, the blonde comments that she has no choice but to fight for real. She assumes an aggressive combat stance before the armed guard who descended to confront her in the basement filled with bodies. The man recoils, trembling and scared, demanding to know at the top of his lungs who that mysterious girl is who invaded their secret hideout. A large explosion of smoke and wooden debris erupts from the basement entrance, breaking the forest's silence. The first guard is thrown brutally out of the hatch, letting out a moan of pain upon colliding with the ground. Immediately after, Cheryl steps firmly onto the wooden debris with her boot, emerging victorious from the underground. Wielding her sword with authority, the blonde young woman demands the enemy tell her everything he knows if he doesn't want to suffer terrible consequences. The guard fallen on the ground just laughs mockingly and warns that even if she can use aura, she is outnumbered and won't get out of there alive. However, heavy footsteps begin to approach behind him on the dirt road, indicating the arrival of unexpected reinforcements. Two other guards who were approaching look to the side in complete shock upon noticing a hostile presence. Eldmia appears like a blue bolt of lightning and defeats them instantly with a single, coordinated, and precise slash. The first guard goes into despair upon realizing the girl also has a powerful ally and orders everyone to be on alert. He widens his eyes upon noticing that the presence of the two invaders simply disappeared in the middle of the smoke. The man looks around confused, seeing that the area around the basement entrance has become completely empty. But before he can make any move, Cheryl appears right behind him with her eyes glowing and her fiery sword raised. The enemy looks back in total panic upon realizing the girl is about to deliver the final blow. He tries desperately to block the attack with his blade, but Cheryl's flaming sword descends with overwhelming force. Cheryl's blade cuts the guard's sword in half as if it were paper amidst an explosion of sparks. She finishes off the opponent with a devastating horizontal slash that throws him far away, completely defeated. In another part of the battlefield, Eldmia jumps into the air to attack one more of the guards who is trying to retreat. He concentrates his powerful blue magic around his body while descending toward his target with deadly precision. The MC lands calmly after defeating the enemy, but realizes at the same moment a new, imposing presence approaching from behind. Baron Papera appears, jumping from the trees, and delivers an aerial attack with his sword imbued with a shimmering pink aura. Eldmia reacts in a fraction of a second and spins his body to block the noble's surprise assault. The two swords collide in a violent clash of magic, generating a blue and pink flash that lights up the entire forest. The impact throws the MC back a little, but he slides along the ground firmly and manages to readjust his combat posture. With a challenging smile, Eldmia comments that he already knew he would show up and identifies the adversary's energy immediately as a knight's aura. The Baron grinds his teeth, furious upon realizing that the boy is the one who can use magic power directly, and calls him an audacious brat. But upon looking around, Papera freezes immediately and lets out a murmur in a complete state of shock. He sees all his elite guards fallen and bloody across the forest's floor, completely neutralized by the duo. Out of his mind, the Baron grabs his own head in despair, cursing himself for having gone to so much trouble to plan that and seeing his chance to get promoted ruined. Eldmia questions him coldly about what kind of gain he expected to have by luring innocent adventurers into that forest just to be massacred. Papera screams, telling the boy to shut his mouth, and advances again with his pink sword in hand, taken over by hatred. He yells that he will use the young people's bodies as a stepping stone to build his glorious reputation, but Eldmia is deeply indignant upon hearing that he killed people just for fame. The blades clash again in an intense friction, but the blue-haired boy's determination begins to overcome the noble's power. In a quick and precise movement, Eldmia completely breaks the Baron's defense posture and destroys his guard. The MC delivers an extremely powerful kick directly into the adversary's chest, throwing him backward with violence. Papera spits blood and lets out a scream of agony upon feeling the full impact of the devastating attack. The noble falls in a clumsy and violent manner to the ground, rolling through the dirt, completely debilitated. Unable to accept the humiliating defeat, he tries to stand up, confused, and asks himself what just happened there. The Baron realizes with dread that the boy moved so fast that his eyes were incapable of tracking any movement. Eldmia approaches slowly with an icy look and says sarcastically for Papera to be very happy with the result of his choices. He raises his sword, shining in an intense blue magical aura, and warns that he will make a point of showing everyone the farce and the insignificant trash that the noble really is. Under the aim of Eldmia's sword, the prisoner panics and confesses desperately that they were just following orders from the demons so they wouldn't be killed. Upon hearing that scary revelation, Cheryl is left completely in shock and without reaction in the middle of the forest. Eldmia is enraged and presses the man, questioning if he is just making up that absurd story about demons to try to save his own skin. Suddenly, a mysterious silhouette appears, jumping quickly over the tree branches. The prisoner insists desperately that he is telling the truth and offers to lead them to the monsters, while a sharp blade appears right near his face. A hooded warrior in a black cloak appears out of nowhere, attacking stealthily from behind Eldmia. The blue-haired young man turns, startled, upon feeling the swift approach of that mysterious man. The prisoner widens his eyes in extreme panic upon feeling the cold blade of the invader touching his neck. In a brutal and silent movement, the assassin cuts the informant's throat right before Eldmia's eyes. Eldmia is left completely paralyzed while the prisoner's body falls lifeless to the blood-filled ground. He stares at the scene in absolute silence, trying to process the sudden death of that valuable witness. The assassin removes his hood and reveals himself to be a smiling man named Walter, commenting casually that he didn't think the prisoner's tongue would be so loose. With a disturbing cynicism, Walter looks at the MC and asks if he doesn't also think that whole situation is horrific. A short time later, the scene changes to the imposing headquarters of the Adventurers Guild under the city's clear sky. Cheryl closes her eyes and realizes that the rumors about the feared unit known as the King's Shadows were totally real. She remembers that this group is an elite secret intelligence force that operates entirely in the dark. They are relentless warriors who don't hesitate to do any dirty work as long as it brings benefits to the kingdom. Cheryl comments that her father never told her the details about them, and Walter, sitting comfortably, confirms with a smile that he is indeed part of the king's shadows. Gathered in a luxurious room, the blonde young woman questions the secret agent about the real reason he brought them to the guild. Eldmia rests his arms on his knees, visibly irritated, and demands to know why they assassinated Baron Popera in the forest like that. Walter closes his eyes and apologizes for the urgent attitude, explaining that he didn't want to steal the boy's thunder, but the MC retorts that that is not the problem. The blue-haired young man yells that the Baron had direct connections with demons and that they could have obtained valuable information if he were alive. He continues pressing to find out what the king's shadows really want, while Walter just maintains his mysterious smile. At that moment, an elegant man wearing a monocle enters the room and offers to answer all of the young man's questions. He approaches cordially and introduces himself as Ingram, the local adventurers guildmaster. Eldmia stares at him suspiciously, trying to calculate the level of the guildmaster's involvement in that entire conspiracy. Ingram offers sincere apologies for what happened and acknowledges that without Eldmia and Cheryl's help, many other adventurers would have lost their lives. The leader settles into an armchair while preparing to reveal a very important secret. He explains calmly that he still can't give all the answers because that subject is extremely confidential within the kingdom itself. Eldmia is outraged by the stalling, and Cheryl agrees with him, demanding to know the reason they were brought there if they aren't going to receive clear answers. With an enigmatic look, Angren decides to come clean and reveal the true reason for that secret meeting. The guildmaster proposes that Eldmia accept the special mission and promises to tell him everything he knows if he agrees to the deal. The blue-haired young man becomes serious and asks immediately what kind of request they are talking about. Ingram plays it mysterious and warns that although he can't give all the details now, the situation is extremely grave. Faced with the room's tense silence, the leader finally reveals that the mission directly involves demons. Cheryl is shocked when he adds that it is the Demon King's army and that physical confrontation will be totally inevitable. Eldmia clenches his own knee tightly upon having the definitive confirmation that the demons were behind that entire tragedy. Suddenly, the memory of a terrible demonic horde led by a powerful general surfaces in his mind, igniting a deep desire for revenge. The MC remembers with great pain that tragic day that changed his life forever. Walter observes in silence while Eldmia sketches a tense and determined smile, faced with that perfect opportunity. To everyone's surprise, the boy accepts the job without hesitation, and Ingram warns that Walter will be the one in charge of explaining all the details to him. The secret agent stands up and calls Eldmia to talk in a more private and secure location. Cheryl stands up immediately after, totally motivated to face the demons alongside her partner. However, Ingram interrupts her abruptly and states that she will not be able to accompany the MC on that journey, leaving the blonde indignant. The guildmaster asks her to understand his situation and not make things more difficult. He explains that he has already put Sir Ekef's daughter's life at risk too much and that he can't allow her to get involved in something even more dangerous, leaving the young woman frustrated. Cheryl calls for Eldmia while watching him walk toward the exit with the mysterious agent. She says she understands his obsession perfectly, but begs him not to go overboard and put himself in extreme danger. Eldmia just gives a little wave over his shoulder with a confident smile on his face, telling her not to worry about anything. Cheryl remains in the room with an extremely worried and thoughtful look, fearing for her companion's future. The conversation continues in a quiet cemetery at late afternoon, where large stone crosses surround the place in silence. Walter observes a beautiful arrangement of white flowers deposited on a grave and comments that Eldmia must have noticed the drastic increase in missions to hunt bandits lately. While they walk among the tombstones, the agent reveals that all the recent cases confirmed that the bandits were acting under external orders, making the blue-haired boy deduce that the demons are behind it. The man in the black cloak explains that those criminals were just expendable pawns used to divert the kingdom's attention, which makes the guy curious about the monster's true goal. Eldmia is surprised to hear from Walter that after interrogating several of those bandits, they discover that a small group of demons managed to infiltrate around the capital. Using the metaphor of an armed puppet, the agent explains that the demons are manipulating local criminals to disperse the kingdom's defensive focus, although their exact plans remain a mystery. The young man questions why they don't send the official army to deal with the threat, but Walter clarifies that any open military movement would make the monsters realize the danger and flee immediately. He reinforces that the kingdom urgently needs someone strong, unknown to the public, and capable of acting with total discretion to resolve this problem. Walter explains in detail that the mission's main objective is to track those invaders, find out what they are planning, and, if possible, capture them alive. The agent extends his hand and hands a paper to Eldmia, ensuring he is fully authorized to fight and eliminate the demons if the situation requires it. The guy receives the document, while Walter warns that the companions in charge of helping him on the journey are already waiting for him at the location indicated on the sheet. Eldmia finds it strange that it is not a solo mission, but the man ponders that facing unknown demons on his own would be a task too dangerous even for him. The MC analyzes the paper seriously upon hearing that the guild leader himself handpicked the team members and guaranteed the power of each one of them. As night falls over the city, the house lights begin to turn on and reveal the location where the meeting will happen. Eldmia finally arrives at the indicated address and stops in front of a large, very busy tavern. Thinking about the imminent danger of the demons hidden nearby, the boy adjusts his hood and mentalizes that he needs to stay extremely alert from now on. He pushes the establishment's wooden doors, which open with a soft creak. Upon entering, the guy is met with a hall full of clients, drinking and talking happily in every corner. Eldmia walks among the tables observing the crowd, imagining that his new partners must be disguised somewhere there in the middle. Suddenly, the MC's eyes widen in pure astonishment upon focusing on an absurd detail right in the back of the hall. To his despair, he runs into a huge welcome banner with his own name written on it, hanging right behind a group of very peculiar figures. Eldmia is left completely speechless and sweating coldly, while wondering what the heck kind of exaggerated reception that is. The guy observes, horrified, a muscular woman with red hair downing a mug of drink in a scandalous way, praying mentally that she isn't who he imagines. The redhead notices his presence and yells happily for the whole hall to hear, calling him by name and telling him to hurry to the table. Totally indignant, Eldmia grinds his teeth and curses the guildmaster for having sent such a bizarre team for a secret mission. With no other choice, the young man approaches and sits before the group with an extremely serious expression and arms crossed. He asks coldly if they are really the prodigies chosen by the guildmaster, but the red-haired warrior just stares at him, confused, without even remembering who Engrim is. The guy points his finger, irritated, and explains that he is talking about the man with glasses who hired them, making the woman finally remember the guy. Eldmia complains about that flashy banner that could alert the demons, but the redhead bursts into laughter and scoffs at his worry, ensuring that no monster would be crazy enough to enter there. The dwarf of the group asks his companion to yell less, and she apologizes in a very relaxed way without giving it the slightest importance. The blue-haired young man snorts with rage at the woman's relaxed attitude, thinking to himself that that life-or-death mission is no joke. Ekaterina is amused by the guy's determination and takes the initiative to present herself formally as a strong warrior from foreign lands. Beside her, a young mage extremely shy and huddled under a dark hood tries to stutter her own name. Eldmia realizes the girl is trembling like a green leaf and starts to suspect she has never participated in real combat before. The MC then turns toward the bearded dwarf who is focused on scribbling on a scroll without giving a hoot about the conversation. Eldmia has a look of boredom and irritation upon realizing he is being completely ignored by the little guy. Ekaterina lets out another scandalous laugh and explains that the grumpy old man is named Gin, an eccentric dwarf who only cares about painting and drawing. The guy bites his lips from such frustration, feeling that that partnership has everything to go very wrong. He panics just imagining that he will have to save the kingdom alongside an ignorant painter, a scared mage, and a scandalous redhead who is already asking for more drinks. Sighing with fatigue, Eldmia rips down the banner with his name and jokes sarcastically that at least he was spared the work of introducing himself to the other clients. Ekaterina smiles, animated, and reveals that she was eager to fight alongside the famous Mad Dog, asking him not to disappoint her. The warrior explains with enthusiasm that she heard rumors that the boy tends to fight with relentless savagery, acting exactly like a rabid dog off the leash. Elmia makes a face of discouragement upon discovering his new nickname, finding the title Mad Dog extremely uncool for someone who expected something much more heroic. At that, a loud noise of an argument coming from behind his chair draws the guy's attention, making him look back. At the tavern counter, a visibly drunk man points his finger and yells at the place's attendant, demanding to know if he has any idea who he is talking to. Without being intimidated, the bearded employee retorts dryly with arms open, saying he doesn't care and that he just needs to pay for everything he consumed. The drunk client turns red with rage and threatens the worker with his finger pointing, ensuring that he will regret that audacity bitterly. The man yells at the top of his lungs that soon everyone there will be his subordinates, while the attendant tells him to pipe down and stop making a fool of himself. Eldamia squints and observes the commotion with a very serious and suspicious expression, sensing that there is something strange with that brawler. Finally, a friend of the drunkard emerges to cover his mouth and hands a bag of coins to the employee, apologizing for the colleague's drunkenness to end the turmoil. The suspicious men leave the tavern in single file, thanking the attendant for the meal while they distance themselves down the dark street. Ekaterina nudges Eldmia to know if he also noticed a movement, and the young man confirms that the behavior of those individuals is extremely suspicious. The young mage comments in a low voice that she heard rumors about humans who secretly collaborate with demons, suggesting that that group might be part of this scheme. Ekaterina opens an intimidating smile and snaps her fingers with excitement, suggesting that they give those suspects a beating to get all the information they need. Eldmia stops her from acting on impulse, warning that they are outnumbered and that just a single survivor escaping would be enough to warn the demons about their presence. The red-haired warrior leans on the guy's neck with a friendly laugh, praising his good sense and agreeing that the guildmaster really knows how to choose good allies. Immediately after, the suspicious men start to weave through a closed trail in the middle of the gloomy forest. Eldmia's group follows the movement, hidden in the shrubs, observing the targets walking with the aid of a lantern. The mage asks if they should continue the pursuit into the woods, but the MC ponders that advancing blindly through unknown terrain in the dark would be too risky. Instead, Elmia extends his hand and conjures a brilliant blue light spirit in the shape of a magical butterfly. The girl in the hood widens her eyes in pure astonishment upon witnessing that beautiful display of magic right in front of her. Holding the small shining spirit between his palms, the guy prepares to send the tracking spell in the direction of the enemies. The luminous butterfly flies softly toward the last man in line, sticking silently to his back without anyone noticing. Elmia warns the group that now they can keep a safe distance and simply follow the luminous trail left by the magical spirit. Impressed by such ability, the mage asks how he manages to control a spirit in that way, and the guy reveals casually that he learned it from his elven master. The boy quickly changes the subject to focus on the tracking and tells everyone to move without making noise, receiving a shy nod from his companion. The light spirit guides the heroes through the dark forest until the suspects arrive at the entrance of a rocky cave at the base of a cliff. Eldmia hides behind a tree and observes the area just ahead with attention. He identifies the place as an old, abandoned dungeon that probably serves as a hideout for the invaders. In the darkness of the entrance, a cold and scary voice emerges, commenting impatiently that the group of men took too long to return. Upon hearing that icy and threatening tone, the MC feels a chill and focuses his attention on the mysterious figure who approaches. As the silhouette advances under the moonlight, two dark pointed horns begin to stand out on the top of his head. Eldmia widens his eyes, taken over by an instant fury upon recognizing the nature of that creature. An imposing demon with blue hair and pointed ears appears before the humans, reprimanding them harshly for not meeting the time agreed upon to return to the base. The blue-haired young man feels sweat running down his face before the absolute confirmation that his worst fears were real. He observes the monster continuing the sermon, complaining about having given permission for his subordinates to rest in the village only to see them breaking such a simple promise. The men bow, scared, and beg 1,000 pardons to the leader. But the drunken brawler ignores the danger and asks mockingly for the demon to relax a little. The drunkard gestures with his hands and says that a small delay of 2 weeks shouldn't be such a big problem, ignoring his colleague's despair beside him who tries to make him shut up. The man arrogantly continues with the insolence, reminding the demon that he is only there thanks to their work and demanding much better treatment from the monster. The The demon encounter stares at him with a somber and icy look, murmuring in a scary way if that was really his opinion. In a quick and merciless movement, the monster grabs the insolent man's face with his powerful hand before he can sketch any reaction. With scary brutality, the demon crushes the insolent man's head, spreading a large amount of blood through the air and across the forest floor. The other subordinates go into absolute panic, screaming and covering their own mouths before that punishment so cruel and sudden. Hidden in the thicket, Eldmia and his companions watch the barbaric execution with expressions of pure shock and disbelief. Wiping the blood from his hand with total disdain, the demon complains about his pawn's ingratitude and laments the foolishness of those who dare to question his authority. The monster turns his back and orders coldly for the survivors to clean up that mess, reminding them that the demon's victory in the war is getting closer and closer. With a threatening look, he promises valuable rewards for everyone when the conquest is complete, ordering them to return immediately to their guard posts. Still trembling and terrorized by their companion's fate, the subordinates heed the order with screams of submission. Ekaterina comments in a provocative tone that demon is a true psychopath and asks if Eldmia agrees with her. Upon noticing the boy remains static and with his body tense, the redhead becomes worried and asks if he is really okay. With a somber smile full of hatred, Eldmia replies with a trembling voice that he never forgot even a single second of his past. Clenching his own chest tightly, he mentalizes all the physical and mental scars left by the monsters on that tragic day that ruined his life. Taken over by an insane desire for revenge, the MC ensures his partner that he is great and celebrates internally for finally having re-encountered his worst enemies. Outside, the human servants carry their companion's bloody corpse into the cave under the watchful gaze of their demonic master. From his hideout, the adventurers observe the enemy leader's footsteps, while he also starts to enter the dungeon. Eager to fight, Ekaterina draws her weapon and suggests invading the place immediately to hunt the invaders. Eldmia quickly grabs the warrior's arm and pulls her back, warning that they can't act without first tracing an intelligent attack plan. With the sudden tug, the warrior ends up losing her balance and flailing her arms, almost calling the demon's attention at the entrance. The monster suspects a noise and turns his head toward the shrubs with an extremely attentive and threatening look. To avoid being discovered, Eldmia pulls Ekaterina close to the ground and covers her mouth with his hand while waiting in absolute silence for the danger to pass. Eldmia starts to sweat coldly and panics absolutely upon hearing the demon's heavy footsteps approaching closer and closer to their hideout. The MC holds his breath with gritted teeth while the enemy's boot steps right near where they are hidden. Suddenly, in a quick movement, the demon turns abruptly and heads back toward the center of the entrance. The monster focuses his gaze on his own hand, where a small magical flame fades in the air in a peaceful way. He sighs, relieved, and murmurs to himself that noise in the thicket was nothing but a pure figment of his imagination. Under the imposing glow of the full moon, the forest silence is broken only by the sighs of relief of the heroes who managed to save themselves. Already in a very distant and safe location, the four adventurers try to recover their breath after having been so close to being discovered. Ekaterina starts to laugh loudly and joke about the near-death situation, leaving the blue-haired young man even more irritated by such irresponsibility. Eldmia can't hold back and explodes in fury against the warrior, yelling that her rash attitude almost made them get captured by the enemies. The redhead tries to calm the boy's spirits with an awkward smile, arguing that their true job there is precisely to defeat the monsters. The MC yells that they have no information about the quantity or power of the demons who are hidden inside the dungeon. He makes it clear that life or death mission is no joke and warns that if she wants to act on her own, it is better to turn around and go home. Eldmia turns to the other two and extends the warning, stating he doesn't care about anyone's motives there, but that he only wants by his side whoever is really committed until the end. The boy turns his back with a melancholic look and whispers firmly that he doesn't have the right to fail in any way in that objective. Taken over by unwavering determination, he swears to himself that he will drag the entire Demon King's army out of the darkness and make them pay for what they did. Eldmia starts to walk alone toward danger, telling his companions to tell the guildmaster that he is more than capable of resolving everything on his own. The rest of the group remains behind, unshaken, not knowing quite what attitude to take faced with that young leader's radical decision. Later, under the intense moonlight, the blue-haired young man positions himself on the top of a cliff to watch the dungeon entrance. From up there, he analyzes coldly the movement around the monster's den. The boy notices that only one sentry is on security duty at the gate and starts to plan how to eliminate the guards silently to invade the place. He gives up on the immediate idea upon realizing he first needs a map or some information about the cave's internal structure. At that instant, the young man feels someone poke his shoulder and turns quickly with a startled look. He is met with the dwarf Gin, who stares at him in silence while extending a mysterious, rolled-up scroll. Eldmia takes the document hesitantly and wonders what that thing is that his companion is handing him. Upon opening the paper, he is left wide-eyed upon realizing he has in his hands a complete and detailed map of the entire dungeon. The young mage approaches slowly and reveals with pride that the drawing was done entirely by the dwarf himself. She explains that Jin spent hours analyzing the region's historical records right after receiving the mission to trace the structure of all the caves there. The MC remembers that dwarves have a natural knack for understanding rocky terrain and finally understands what he was drawing at the tavern. Comfortable with the new situation, Elmia thanks his companion for the excellent work and receives a proud thumbs up back. Ekaterina approaches immediately after and calls the boy by his nickname in a much more restrained way than usual. With a repentant look, she apologizes for her relaxed behavior and confesses that she ended up getting carried away because she hadn't fought in a group for a long time. The blue-haired young man accepts the apology and ponders gently that, at the end of the day, the important thing is that they weren't discovered. The redhead ensures she won't pry into his personal motives for hating the demons in that way. She reinforces that the three also didn't accept the mission on a whim, and that everyone there possesses strong and particular reasons to see it through to the end. Extending her hand with a friendly smile, the warrior invites Elmia to trust them and fight like a true team from then on. Elmia feels a bit embarrassed for having exploded in that way with his companions and recognizes that he acted in an immature manner by letting his emotions take control. He clenches his fists tightly upon realizing he was arrogant by pretending he would be able to resolve everything alone without anyone's help. The boy breathes deeply and makes an important decision about how he should lead the group from then on. The MC shakes the warrior's hand firmly and confesses that, in truth, he is the one who will need their help and protection at his back. With a confident smile, he pulls up his hood and states he will use that mission to make up for the blunder he made minutes ago. Eldmia decrees that, from that moment on, they will unite each one's strengths and create an unbeatable attack plan together. Meanwhile, at the dungeon entrance, the only human guard continues doing the security for the place in absolute boredom. The sentry yawns lazily and grumbles loudly about the unbearable sleepiness he is feeling on that cold night. Suddenly, a strange noise coming from the woods makes the man widen his eyes in a total state of alert. He spots a giant boot emerging from the shadows and panics, shouting to know who is approaching the secret hideout. With slow steps, Ekaterina reveals herself holding a huge stone hammer with a challenging smile on her face. Parallelly, Eldmia explains the plan to the group using Gin's map, showing that the dungeon is composed of several ring-shaped rooms around a large central hall. The young man points to the drawing and deduces that the most isolated room at the back of the cave is the perfect place for the demons to perform their suspicious rituals. The leader plans that one of them serves as bait to call the guards' attention, while the rest of the group invades the main hall, offering himself initially for the task. However, Ekaterina interrupts him with a mischievous wink and assumes the plan's leadership, decreeing with pride that she will be the perfect bait for that mission. Ekaterina appears in the spotlight, displaying a confident smile that reveals her fangs. With her eyes shaded by her red bangs, she comments that the role of serving as a distraction suits her very well. Displaying her muscular physique and defined abs, Ekaterina rests her huge metal hammer on her shoulders. She declares openly that acting in a stealthy way isn't her style, and she prefers to do what she knows best: cause a big stir. One of the human guards of the den is caught by surprise and looks, scared, toward the sudden call, while his forehead drips with cold sweat from pure nervousness before the interruption. Advancing with fury and wielding her heavy combat hammer, Ekaterina yells in an intimidating way at the sentry, ordering him to warn the traitors allied with the demons that she wants them all out there to fight. With a firm stomp on the ground, the red-haired warrior jumps toward the terrified guard, raising her big hammer above her head to deliver a crushing blow from top to bottom. The impact of Ekaterina's blow against the ground causes a huge explosion of dirt and smoke, generating a destructive shockwave that sweeps the location. The attack's devastating force causes the rocky structures around the cave entrance to tremble violently and start to crumble amidst a dense curtain of dust. After the dust settles, Ekaterina observes the defeated and unconscious guard stretched out on the floor near the partially destroyed dungeon entrance while she holds the hammer's handle firmly. With a relaxed smile and gritted teeth, the warrior starts to laugh loudly and admits with good humor that maybe she exaggerated a little on the blow's strength. Looking back over her shoulder, the redhead warns Eldmia that is the perfect opportunity for the group to advance before the enemies start to surround the area. Eldmia responds with restraint, thanking Ekaterina for her help as a distraction, and prepares to press forward with the stealthy invasion. Under the bright light of the full moon, Eldmia leads Jin and Raleigh into the darkness of the cave, firmly stating that it is time to put their infiltration plan into action. Inside the imposing underground temple, large stone pillars support a ceiling decorated with gargoyle statues and red banners, while a sinister mist of purple energy hangs in the air. With his back to the entrance of the hall, the demon leader in Contra stands in absolute silence, seemingly sensing that something strange is happening nearby. A human servant rushes into the hall desperately to alert them that they are under attack and that an intruder is causing chaos at the entrance, but Encantrin replies coldly that he is already aware of the situation. In the blink of an eye, the demon moves with extreme speed and takes down the messenger with his own magic-infused hands, leaving the man struggling on the bloodied floor. With a crazed look and veins bulging on his pale face, Encanter bares his fangs and arrogantly claims that he was able to sense the presence of the intruders himself. Standing over the victim and surrounded by a dark aura, the demon calls the intruder a traitor and scoffs at his lack of control, mocking the enemy's inability to hide his bloodlust. Visibly frightened by his master's volatile temperament, another hooded subordinate asks about their course of action and suggests a strategic retreat before enemy reinforcements arrive. Encantra turns his head slightly and coldly rejects the suggestion, ordering them to proceed with the original instructions to ensure final victory belongs to the demons. With a stern and intimidating gaze, the demon commands the subordinate to focus exclusively on his tasks and leave the rest to him, receiving a shaky response of submission from the terrified servant. Encantra begins to walk toward the corridors, gathering dense, purple magical energy in his right hand, grumbling that he will make the intruders bitterly regret forcing him to act personally. Meanwhile, in the dungeon's inner corridors, a group of armed sentinels runs in a rush, shouting to each other to stop the intruder from the entrance at any cost. The guards hurry past a pillar without noticing that Eldmia is hidden in the shadows right behind them, watching their movements silently. With his gaze focused and alert, the blue-haired youth notes with relief that all the guards' attention has been completely drawn to the chaos created at the main entrance. Eldmia whispers to the dwarf Jin that they should take advantage of the distraction to bypass the main corridors and move stealthily toward the back rooms. However, upon looking to the side, the MC suddenly changes his expression and shows concern as he notices that something is wrong with one of his team members. Behind them, the mage Raleigh is on her knees on the cold stone floor with her head down, her body trembling intensely due to the panic consuming her. Eldmia calls the young mage by name. She looks up, startled, and responds in shock, clutching her wooden staff with trembling hands. The blue-haired youth approaches and gently holds Relay's hand to comfort her, asking if she is okay, while the girl apologizes through tears for being so nervous. Looking at the floor with sadness and cold sweat, Relay laments her own attitude, saying she finds it shameful to freeze in fear and shake like that at such an important moment. Eldmia watches the young girl in silence for a few moments, maintaining a gentle and understanding expression in the face of his companion's sincere outburst. Breaking the silence, the young man firmly denies Relay's claim, causing her to widen her purple eyes in surprise as she hears him. With an encouraging smile and a hand on his chest, Eldmia confesses sincerely that his own heart also feels like it is about to jump out of his chest whenever he thinks about fighting the demons. He explains that he does not allow fear to be the only feeling that dominates him in that moment, forcing himself to look past the dread to concentrate exclusively on the goal of completing the mission. Fixing his gaze on Rely, the group leader reminds her that she also has her own strong reasons for having reached that point and encourages her to focus on that so they can overcome the fear together. Inspired by Eldmia's words of support, the young mage regains her determination and promises aloud that she will do her best to help in the battle. With renewed spirits, Eldmia leads the trio's quick dash through the inner corridors of the Stone Palace, mourning that they are already very close to the central hall. Outside in the forest, metallic sparks fly and the shrill sound of clashing weapons echoes through the night, indicating that Ekaterina's battle continues intensely. The red-headed warrior lets out a crazed laugh and spins her heavy hammer in the air with ease, challenging the enemies to attack from wherever they like. With a powerful upward strike, Ekaterina throws one of her opponents into the air, mocking the weakness of the guards trying to surround her. Another opponent is thrown to the ground violently after receiving a precise hit, while his companions hesitate upon seeing the damage caused by the lone warrior. Gritting his teeth in pure anger and with sweat dripping down his face, one of the remaining sentinels screams with hatred at the red-headed intruder. Without giving them time to react, Ekaterina advances with eyes glowing in combat fury, raising her hammer, which is wrapped in a trail of searing heat, to deliver another devastating attack. The warrior strikes the ground with all her strength, creating a violent explosion of dust and flames that throws the surrounding opponents far away. With the area finally clear, Ekaterina rests her huge weapon on the ground and calmly watches the bodies of the defeated sentinels scattered around her. Wiping sweat from her chin with the back of her glove, the redhead breathes deeply and grumbles with disdain that those men were barely enough to serve as a warm-up. Suddenly, the warrior feels an overwhelming pressure and freezes as she sees a pair of demonic pink eyes glowing intensely in the darkness right behind her. Ekaterina's confident smile vanishes instantly, giving way to an expression of pure tension and seriousness as she clenches her teeth in the face of the sudden threat. In a quick and brutal movement, the demon Encantra descends, delivering a slash of shimmering magical energy, which is blocked at the last second by the handle of the warrior's heavy hammer, generating a powerful clash of forces. Ekaterina faces her opponent with a defiant smile and bared teeth. Sweating from the effort of the combat, she comments provokingly that the enemy has finally decided to reveal himself. Lord Encantra appears imposingly before the red-headed warrior, wrapped in a dark aura with his pink eyes glowing through the darkness. Ekaterina insults him, calling him a horned freak. The demon Encantra maintains a serious and cold expression, observing his opponent in absolute silence while the wind lightly stirs his silver hair. Ekaterina assumes a defensive combat stance with her hammer. Parallel to this, Encantra analyzes the situation and realizes that the redhead is acting only as a distraction to keep the guards busy while the others infiltrate the site. Sketching a slight smirk with his bared fangs, the demon leader concludes mentally that the other intruders must have already entered the dungeon, admitting that their strategy was clever. Encantra watches Ekaterina from a distance and comments aloud that using a decoy was a good plan, leaving the red-headed warrior confused by his sudden change in attitude. In a hurry to resolve the situation, the demon raises his left hand, concentrating a dense flame of shimmering magic around it, and declares that he will end the fight quickly. Ekaterina smiles provokingly even under the enemy's pressure, challenging Encantra to try and attack her with everything he has. Inside the silent dungeon, the hurried sound of footsteps echoes rhythmically through the empty stone corridors. Eldmia leads Raleigh and Jin's quick run through the underground passages, encouraging the group and warning that they are only one turn away from the main hall. At the end of the stone corridor, a bright opening emanates a strong and mysterious pink light, indicating that they have found their objective. The group stops abruptly upon reaching the entrance to the main chamber. Eldmia draws his sword immediately, maintaining a tense and alert look at what he sees. From high at the entrance, the heroes observe a large circular magic portal pulsing with purple and pink energy in the center of the hall, surrounded by subordinate mages performing a ritual. Eldmia shouts that he has finally found the enemies, while Rely observes the magical structure with astonishment. The blue-haired youth confirms seriously that there is no doubt about what is before them. The magic portal continues to spin and emanate a dense pink energy, while Eldmia explains that the enemies are constructing a teleportation spell to create a gateway. The protagonist reflects seriously on the demon's intentions behind creating that gate, questioning if they are planning a large-scale invasion or if they are transporting something of extreme importance. Realizing there is no time for hesitation or assumptions, Eldmia propels his body forward and moves to attack without faltering. Jumping from the platform directly toward the ritual room, Eldmia vows to interrupt the gate's activation before it is too late. One of the hooded subordinates, who has horns and a beard, notices the intruder's sudden approach and reacts with irritation. The enemy mage advances quickly and extends his arm forward, conjuring a red magic circle in his hand and ordering the youth to get out of the way. Eldmia is caught by surprise in mid-air when a red trap magic circle activates under his feet, emitting an intense glow. The blue-haired youth clenches his teeth with an expression of shock as he realizes he has fallen directly into a magic trap set by the opponent. A huge and violent column of fire explodes instantly from the magic circle, completely swallowing Eldmia's silhouette amidst the flames. The blue-haired youth finds himself trapped in the bright red circular trap that emanates intense light under his feet during the spell's activation. Eldmia shows irritation and surprise at the speed of the activation of the explosive spell that suddenly enveloped him. The flame continues to rise with great intensity in the center of the stone hall, temporarily blocking everyone's vision of the place. The subordinate mage smiles victoriously with a clenched fist, laughing loudly as he believes he managed to defeat the intruder once and for all with his trap. To the enemy's surprise, Eldmia emerges unscathed from within the flames, protected by a bright barrier of wind and blue magic that he conjured around his own body. The enemy mage is in absolute shock, with sweat dripping from his forehead as he realizes that the youth was able to conjure a defensive barrier in a fraction of a second to nullify the fire attack. Behind him, Relly points her bright green staff forward and commands the magic wind, supporting the group leader's advance. Propelled by Relly's magic, Eldmia performs a fast jump in the air with his sword raised, falling directly onto the subordinate mage positioned near the portal. The hooded mage reacts quickly and conjures a hexagonal pink barrier with his hands, blocking Eldmia's downward sword strike in a strong clash of forces. The blade of Eldmia's sword presses against the enemy's magic barrier with force, generating purple sparks and a constant noise of static energy. Observing the shield closely, Eldmia is surprised by the fact that the opponent also possesses advanced defensive barrier conjuring abilities. With an alert gaze, the protagonist notices a new threat approaching quickly from the flank and remains on guard to dodge the danger. Another enemy mage appears in the background, preparing a concentrated sphere of fire while the bearded mage panics and screams, warning of her presence. The mage conjures and fires a huge fireball toward Eldmia, who protects himself by using his blade to contain the impact of the magic explosion. Suddenly, the stone ceiling cracks and collapses violently, allowing the dwarf Jean to fall by surprise from above, landing a precise strike with his pickaxe on the enemy mage's head. The green-haired conjurer is caught totally off guard by the aerial attack and shows an expression of pure panic as she tries to understand what happened. Jin descends with determination and pickaxe in hand after breaking the rock structure, surprising his adversaries with his vertical infiltration tactic. The dwarf's heavy strike hits the enemy mage's back with force, making her scream in pain as she is knocked instantly to the stone floor. The bearded mage is frightened by his allies' quick defeat and is distracted looking back, leaving his protective barrier unstable for an instant. Eldmia takes advantage of the opening immediately, concentrating his focus on the blade with a look of extreme seriousness. The blue-haired youth channels intense, bright blue energy into his sword, preparing a concentrated attack with high penetrating power. With a quick movement, Eldmia's energized sword hits the hexagonal enemy barrier, making it crack and shatter completely with the impact. Eldmia's blade pierces the bearded mage's defense relentlessly, delivering a deep cut to the opponent's chest amidst shards of purple magic. The subordinate screams in agony as blood spurts from his wound, covering part of his face with the impact of the attack. Eldmia grabs the enemy's face with his left hand and throws him with force against the floor, finishing the fight with a violent impact that cracks the stone floor. Holding the wounded opponent by his collar, Eldmia lifts him seriously and demands answers, asking the reason why they are building that teleportation gate. With blood dripping from his mouth and nose, the defeated mage sketches a scornful smile and responds defiantly that he would never reveal such information to a mere human. Eldmia faces the downed enemy with clenched teeth and uncontrollable fury stamped on his sweaty face, calling the opponent a wretch. Relly and Eldmia talk near the unconscious prisoner, The protagonist points out that whatever their objective was, one wrong move would have put the group in serious trouble, while the mage expresses doubt. The teleportation portal continues to pulse intensely in the background, and Elbia observes with concern that the magic gate was almost complete. Decided to act, Elmia advances quickly, unsheathing his sword to destroy the structure, stating that they must break it immediately, but Rely tries to stop him desperately from proceeding. Raleigh, sweating from nervousness next to Eldmia, warns firmly that destroying the portal by force would be too dangerous, leaving the youth confused by the warning. The mage explains in detail how the magic portal functions, highlighting that it is a spell that tears space using a massive amount of accumulated mana to connect two distant locations. She warns that if that flow were to collapse all at once, the consequences would be devastating. With an expression of pure shock and bewilderment, Eldmia listens to Ralee's explanation that the accumulated mana would explode with enough force to wipe that entire region off the map. In silence, the blue-haired youth clenches his teeth so hard that his fangs are evident, trying to contain the frustration he feels in that moment of danger. Taken by desperation, Elmia grabs the wounded enemy mage again and screams with fury, demanding that he reveal how to deactivate the magic portal since he was the one who built it. Even wounded and with blood dripping down his face, the subordinate shows mockery and asks cynically if the boy really believes there is a method to stop it. Suddenly, a strong spray of blood is splattered over Elmia's face, cutting the conversation off abruptly amidst the tension in the hall. Wiping off the blood, the horned mage smiles provokingly and repeats with disdain that he will say absolutely nothing to a pathetic human like him. The prisoner guarantees arrogantly that even if the current plan fails, the final victory of the demons is inevitable, saying that humans should just wait in silence for the day they will be ruled. Rely watches, horrified, while Eldmia lowers his head with his face covered. Covering his blood-stained face with a gloved hand, the protagonist whispers in a terrifyingly calm tone that he had already ordered the prisoner to speak. The mage laughs loudly at the threats, stating with disdain that there is nothing the youth can do to force him to cooperate. Losing control of his emotions completely, Eldmia delivers a brutal and relentless sword strike toward the opponent. With an icy look devoid of any pity, the youth demands again, in a threatening tone, that the prisoner teach him how to deactivate the magic gate. Beside himself, Elmia beats the fallen subordinate repeatedly with blind fury, causing a large amount of blood to spread across the stone floor under the violence of the blows. Raleigh watches the scene of extreme violence in an absolute state of shock and dread, covering her own mouth in the face of the cruelty shown by her companion. Jin and another hooded prisoner observe the enraged attack with expressions of pure panic, while Eldmia screams, demanding to know why the demons built that magic portal. With his fists bathed in blood and eyes wide with pure hatred, the protagonist screams repeatedly in search of answers. Eldmia is tormented by a painful memory from his childhood, recalling the tragic day when the demons invaded and burned his home village, leaving him alone amidst the destruction and the bodies of his loved ones. Screaming amidst tears and fury, the youth demands an answer from his opponent while continuing to deliver blows without mercy. Realizing that the protagonist was going to kill the prisoner, Jean runs quickly and holds Elmia's arm to restrain him, asking seriously what his problem is to act in such an uncontrolled way. The dwarf Jin faces his companion with a look of extreme concern, sweating from tension as he tries to make him regain his reason. Upon being restrained, Elmia seems to finally wake from his trance of fury, looking to the side with a confused and frightened expression as he realizes the gravity of his actions. The youth moves away slowly and observes in silence the bloody and motionless body of the enemy on the floor, visibly shocked by his own lack of control. With his head down, Elmia grinds his teeth in frustration with himself, letting out an annoyed sigh of the situation. Raleigh and Jin watch their leader from behind, and the mage comments timidly that was definitely not the calmest way to conduct an interrogation. Suddenly, the heavy echo of slow footsteps coming from the entrance of the hall breaks the silence of the environment, causing Eldmia and Jin to look immediately in the direction of the sound. As the noise of the footsteps approaches, a mysterious voice resonates through the stone corridor, commenting ironically that he is also not the best person to talk about acting calmly. Upon looking toward the entrance, Rely widens her eyes and turns pale from pure dread at what she has just witnessed. A hand appears dragging an unconscious person by her red hair. The mysterious voice points out indifferently that, despite everything, the opponent was a quite persistent warrior. Eldmia freezes instantly upon recognizing the person who is being dragged on the floor. In a close-up, the blue-haired youth's face becomes tense and covered in cold sweat upon witnessing the desperate situation of his teammate. Eldmir remembers the conversation he had with Ekaterina in the forest before they separated, where he had asked if she would really be okay acting alone as a decoy, receiving a confident answer from her to leave everything in her hands. In the memory, the young man recalls having warned the warrior to just attract the guard's attention and run if the situation became too dangerous, receiving a laid-back comment from her about him worrying too much. Ekaterina had guaranteed with a cocky smile and bared teeth that she would finish quickly outside and meet them inside the dungeon. Back in the present, the demon and Cantor enters the hall imposingly under strong magical pressure, dragging Ekaterina's bloody and inert body by her hair. Exhibiting a calm and disdainful look, the demon leader comments coldly that in the end, the red-headed warrior was nothing but an insignificant adversary to him. Consumed by fury at seeing his friend in that state, Eldmia clenches his fist so hard that the handle of his sword trembles under the accumulated tension. In an explosive movement of pure rage, the protagonist jumps toward the demon with his sword raised to attack him with maximum force. With eyes wide with hatred and a face distorted by fury, Eldmia screams desperately, asking what the monster did to his companion. With quick reflexes and devoid of any honor, Encontra lifts Ekaterina's body by her attire to use her as a human shield against the impending blow. Upon noticing the enemy's cowardly maneuver, Eldmia widens his eyes in desperation and hesitates in the middle of his attack, realizing he would hit his defenseless friend if he continued with the strike. In midair, the youth tries desperately to deviate the trajectory of his sword, turning his body with difficulty to avoid hurting Ekaterina while the demon prepares his counterattack. With the move aborted in a hurry, Eldmia collides against the stone ground while trying to protect and hold the inert body of the red-headed warrior who was thrown in his direction. The youth supports his unconscious friend and screams desperately for Ekaterina's name, imploring her to resist and stay conscious. However, a warning of danger flashes in Eldmia's mind upon noticing an extremely fast hostile approach coming from his front. Taking advantage of the protagonist's distraction, Lord Encontra advances swiftly with a clenched fist and eyes glowing in pink, delivering a direct attack against Eldmia's defenseless face. Lord Encontra lands a direct and devastating punch on Eldmia's right cheek, causing the youth's face to contort from the violent impact. Under the colossal force of the demon's punch, Eldmia is thrown brutally backward and collides against the dungeon's stone wall amidst a large shockwave. Encontra observes the result of the blow with a serious and analytical look, maintaining his expression of superiority while dust floats around. Demonstrating surprising resistance, Eldmia emerges standing among the rubble, holding the unconscious Ekaterina firmly in his arms to protect her. With a bruised face bleeding from his cheek and nose, the protagonist faces the demon leader with a focused look, full of unwavering determination. Encontra admits disdainfully to being impressed by the boy's resilience, commenting that the punch delivered previously had not been light at all. While Eldmia lays Ekaterina gently on the floor in a safe place, the demon wonders internally how the youth is still able to remain standing after receiving that direct attack. Looking at his own left hand, Encontra reflects on a strange and powerful magical sensation emanating from Eldmia, something he guarantees he has never felt coming from the boy before. Focusing his gaze on Eldmia's clenched fist, the demon leader begins to suspect the hidden potential of his adversary, fearing that his suspicions are real. Suddenly, a pickaxe appears striking from top to bottom toward Encontra's head from behind, catching him by surprise. With quick reflexes, the demon turns his head slightly and uses his arm to defend himself from the surprise attack coming from the rear. With a quick movement of his arm, Encontra blocks and destroys the wooden handle of the pickaxe, shattering the mining tool into several pieces. The demon observes with surprise the debris of the mining weapon floating around him, questioning with disdain the use of such a rudimentary tool in combat. At that same instant, an imposing yellow conjuring circle appears, glowing on the ceiling of the stone hall, preparing a concentrated energy attack. A powerful beam of golden magic light hits Encontra directly in the back, pushing him forward with the force of the elemental impact. The demon grinds his teeth with an expression of irritation at being hit by the unexpected magic attack, which temporarily destabilizes his stance. Raleigh appears wielding her staff firmly, surrounded by multiple active golden magic circles around her, demonstrating total focus to provide support to her companions. With a deep look, the young mage shouts with determination, ordering the enemy to be defeated under the power of her conjuration. Raleigh fires a succession of golden light beams toward Encantra, forcing the demon leader to retreat as the magic projectiles hit the ground. Encantra clicks his tongue with irritation, quickly changing his stance to deal with the volley of magic attacks coming in his direction. With agile and fast movements, the demon advances, dodging the explosions of light that hit the stone floor right next to him. The monster decides to prioritize the elimination of Raleigh, advancing directly against her with the intention of neutralizing the most annoying magic threat first. Divided into two panels, Raleigh exhibits a confident and clever smirk, while Encantra realizes too late that he has fallen into another trap set by the team. The stone floor breaks violently when a robust hand suddenly emerges from a hole dug into the floor. Jin appears by surprise from within the stone floor and grabs Encantra's ankle firmly with both hands, immobilizing the demon, who looks down in total shock. The dwarf holds the enemy's leg with all his strength, maintaining a determined look from inside the crater to ensure he cannot escape. Encantra's move but remains momentarily locked by the physical force imposed by the dwarf who traps his feet to the ground. The demon leader is paralyzed with wide eyes, realizing that his mobility has been totally compromised by the joint action of Jin and Raleigh. Taking advantage of the enemy's immobilization, Raleigh prepares a huge golden conjuring circle right before him, channeling a massive amount of elemental energy. With her eyes focused on the target, the young mage screams with conviction and orders the attack to be fired directly at the defenseless target. Raleigh releases a massive blast of concentrated golden light from the top of her staff, swallowing the trapped demon in a violent torrent of magic energy. Encantra is thrown violently backward under the destructive force of the golden explosion, scattering stones and smoke throughout the chamber. With sharp reflexes, the demon recovers in the air and lands in a crouched position, sliding backward as his hands scrape the stone floor to break the impact. The monster raises his serious and focused gaze toward the intruders, quickly recomposing himself from the sequence of attacks he suffered. Eldmia appears, falling from above at high speed, delivering a vertical sword strike that collides directly with the magic guard raised by Encantra. Eldmia's blade presses strongly against the demon's forearm, which is covered by a dense purple magic barrier, generating a great contest of strength. Divided into two panels, Eldmia clenches his teeth with frustration at having his attack blocked, while Encantra faces him from up close with total seriousness. The two warriors initiate a close-quarters combat at high speed, exchanging a frantic succession of blows and defenses that generate intense metallic sparks in the hall. In two panels, Encantra delivers a punch wrapped in shimmering energy that is blocked by a scrape of Eldmia's sword, forcing the youth to use both hands to hold the impact. Without giving any respite, the demon advances with eyes glowing in pink and delivers another direct attack against the young swordsman. In two panels, a blast of golden energy passes, scraping through the chamber, forcing Encantra to dodge abruptly and interrupt his combo of physical attacks. The demon narrows his purple eyes with growing anger, realizing that the constant magic attacks are severely hindering his direct combat against Eldmia. Raleigh remains positioned with her staff in hand, breathing heavily, while Encantra concludes mentally that he should have eliminated the mage first to avoid that annoying support. Taking advantage of the opening, Eldmia advances fiercely, shouting for his opponent to pay attention to him, delivering a new strike with his sword wrapped in a blue aura. At extreme speed, the protagonist cuts the opponent's defense, delivering a clean cut to Encantra's chest that makes sparks of light and energy fly through the hall. The demon spits blood from the impact of the wound, showing an expression of pain and surprise at having his guard overcome by the youth's blade. Eldmia slides his feet on the floor to maintain his balance and performs a quick spin with his body, preparing a follow-up attack to finish the adversary with his shining sword. With a precise strike, the swordsman drives his blade toward Encantra's chest, spreading a new curtain of blood and shouting that he has managed to hit the target. However, an expression of astonishment takes over Eldmia's face in the next instant when a sign of danger flashes in his mind before an unexpected movement from the demon. Encantra holds the blade of Eldmia's sword directly with his left hand, locking the weapon firmly against his own chest to prevent it from advancing more deeply. The demon lets out a mocking laugh and mocks, saying the kingdom must be very desperate to send humans capable of using mana against him. With an extremely sadistic look, the monster warns that he will now also start fighting seriously. At that moment, the muscles of his arm begin to inflate monstrously, while a dark energy envelops his fists. Concentrating all his evil power, the enemy guarantees that he will crush them using his full strength without caring about the tricks they try to use. In the face of that overwhelming display of power, Eldmia is completely paralyzed and begins to sweat from pure nervousness. The demon assumes an even more monstrous form and promises to kill everyone there to ensure his plans are carried out to the end. All this makes the protagonist remember his past when he delivered frantic blows against a training dummy in the middle of the forest. At that time, young Eldmia trained tirelessly with his sword to become stronger every day, until his older sister's annoyed voice breaks his focus, asking harshly what he thinks he is doing. The boy responds naively that he is just training, but Asilia makes it clear that is not the problem. The elf explains that he was using pure mana in its raw state, when the correct thing would be to refine it, to transform it into aura first. She uses an analogy, explaining that mana is their source of power, functioning like molten iron that is extremely boiling in its liquid form. Asilia continues, saying that aura arises when this energy is molded like solid steel to coat the body or a weapon for attack and defense. Pure mana is meant to be molded according to the user's will, altering the properties of the elements of nature. Finally, she warns him that trying to coat his own body with raw mana is the same as covering himself in boiling iron, which should leave him gravely injured. Eldmia is confused and reveals that he has been doing exactly that for years, leaving Asilia completely shocked and without a reaction to the revelation. Far from thinking it's bad, the youth finds the idea of coating himself in molten iron incredibly stylish, while his sister remains speechless. Perceiving Asilia's sudden silence, the boy stares at her, intrigued, and asks what is wrong with her. In thoughts, the elf despairs upon realizing that a human body should never be able to withstand that, as only two races in the world are capable of using mana in its raw state. Curious about her reaction, Eldmia asks if there are really others like him and to which race they belong. Desperate at the question, the young woman hesitates and looks away, visibly tense for hiding a great secret. To change the subject, she gives him a pat on the head and says that they are still in the middle of training, promising to talk about it later. The boy is quite disappointed with the answer and complains that she left him so curious without giving any explanation. However, she thinks to herself that if Eldmia's goal continues to be the same, there will be no way to avoid him discovering the truth. Back in the present, the youth finds himself before the transformed demon, remembering his sister's words that he would end up discovering everything sooner or later. Eldmia clenches his teeth and prepares for the worst, aware that there is no doubt about the extreme danger he is in. Without wasting time, the monster advances with an overwhelming punch toward the protagonist. Eldmia tries to defend himself with his weapon, but the impact of the punch is so devastating that it breaks his sword in half. The youth widens his eyes in complete shock upon realizing that his defense was completely destroyed in the blink of an eye. Taking advantage of the opening, the demon delivers another violent blow directly against the totally defenseless youth. The impact crushes Eldmia against the stone floor with brutal force. With the overwhelming blow, the protagonist is thrown far away, sliding across the floor without being able to recover. He spits blood and lets out a groan of pain as his body is thrown with extreme violence. Eldmia collapses unconscious and bloody on the floor, leaving his allies in complete panic. Desperate, the mage Relai screams her companion's name upon seeing him be defeated in such a brutal way. The demon then turns his attention to Relai, walking menacingly in her direction while she tries to prepare herself to defend. He begins to concentrate a large amount of purple magic energy in his hand to finish the young woman. In a fast jump, the monster advances from above, delivering a deadly attack in the mage's direction. In a desperate attempt to protect herself, Relai raises her staff and conjures a mana barrier around her. However, the magic shield is shattered easily by the demon's colossal physical force, frightening the girl. The shockwave throws her far away, making her spit blood and fall violently to the floor. Before she can recover, the enemy runs swiftly to deliver the coup de grace. The demon jumps toward the fallen Relai, preparing to crush her without any pity. Suddenly, the floor shatters and a huge explosion of debris blocks the monster's path. The demon leader widens his eyes upon being caught by surprise by the unexpected interference in the middle of his attack. The dwarf Jin appears suddenly and uses all his physical strength to block the adversary's blow, protecting his ally. The impact pushes the demon backward, forcing him to slide across the stone floor to regain his balance. He narrows his eyes and looks fixedly to the side, feeling that something different is about to happen. In the middle of the dust and rubble, a mysterious greenish light begins to shine intensely from a collapsed passage. An imposing silhouette emerges, rising among the stones while strong green energy emanates around him. Jin tries to catch the demon by surprise, jumping from behind with his mining tool raised. However, the dwarf is completely paralyzed with dread upon realizing that the enemy noticed his presence instantly. Lord Enchantress sketches a sadistic smile and prepares to counterattack the intruder without any hesitation. In a quick and precise movement, the monster spins his body, supporting his foot firmly on the floor. The demon leader delivers a brutal kick directly into Jin's chest, who is caught totally defenseless. The colossal force of the impact generates a huge explosion of smoke and shards, throwing the dwarf far away. With all the kingdom's warriors fallen and defeated throughout the hall, Lord Encanter observes the destruction with total sovereignty. Elmia tries to stand up with difficulty, while despairing upon noticing that the opponent's strength and speed had reached a completely different level. The monster then points his hand toward his blue-haired subordinate to give him direct orders. Lord Encanter orders coldly for him to finish opening the portal, receiving an immediate and shaky response of consent. The subordinate extends his hands and begins to channel his magic to stabilize the immense purple portal in the middle of the chamber. Eldmia observes the scene with anger, trying to understand if that terrifying power of the demon leader is some type of special ability. While the portal expands, the young swordsman wonders in desperation how they will be able to stop that monster. Suddenly, small sparks of purple mana begin to oscillate unstably around Lord Encanter's fingers. The demon lets out a click of irritation upon feeling that his own body is beginning to suffer from the energy overload. Eldmia focuses his alert gaze on that detail and widens his eyes upon realizing a great weakness in the enemy. The protagonist remembers his sister's lessons about molten iron and realizes that the technique used by the demon has a crucial flaw. With a bloody smile on his lips, the youth decides that his only option for victory is to risk everything in one last move. With renewed determination, Eldmia supports his foot firmly on the floor and heads into the attack at high speed. Lord Encanter notices the sudden approach and turns his face, surprised by the boy's resilience. Letting out a furious war cry, the swordsman jumps directly against the huge adversary. The demon tries to strike him with disdain, commenting that he should have let him crawl away while he still could. However, Eldmia exhibits a clever smile upon revealing that he was hiding a handful of sand in his closed hand. The youth throws the sand directly into the monster's eyes, blinding him temporarily in the middle of the jump. Totally caught by surprise, Lord Encanter blinks in desperation upon realizing the dirty trick used by the opponent. The demon leader is enraged at the boy's audacity, but Eldmia is already drawing his broken blade for the decisive attack. Taking advantage of the opening, the youth jumps onto the giant's back and positions himself to strike with his shattered sword. Eldmia drives the tip of the broken weapon directly into the demon's shoulder, making blood gush intensely with the impact. Lord Encanter lets out a roar of extreme pain upon being hit gravely in the back. The protagonist reveals that he knows the opponent's body is only inflated with mana instead of being protected by a real barrier. Eldmia explains that by forcing all that energy into himself, the demon is about to reach the limit of his own body. The monster widens his eyes in dread upon realizing that the youth discovered his weak point and that his body was already at the limit. With a wild look, the protagonist warns that he will inject even more of his own energy to see if the enemy can withstand the impact. The demon screams in complete desperation while a massive amount of blue mana is forced into his wound, making him bleed even more. Lord Encanter's face contorts in pure agony and fury under the unbearable pain of the magic overload. Eldmia guarantees with determination that he will not back down and that he will continue injecting energy until the monster's body simply explodes. Without alternatives, the demon grinds his teeth with hatred and threatens to make the boy feel the same suffering. He begins to channel his purple mana back toward the wound to try and repel the intruder. Lord Encontror fires a violent blast toward the youth, shouting that he will show him the true power of the mana he just received. The clash of forces generates a huge blood explosion that spreads across the hall's stone pillars. Suddenly, the warrior Revi appears from above, delivering a devastating kick to the monster's neck to destabilize him. The demon leader is shocked and wonders how that warrior can still remain standing after everything she suffered. Revi screams with all her strength for Eldmia to finish the opponent, once and for all. Gathering all the mana he has left, the protagonist molds an immense and shining blue blade around his broken sword. With an overwhelming vertical strike, the youth drives the energy sword into the demon, generating an immense shockwave that cracks the stone floor. The colossal impact destroys the floor around them, scattering stones and dust throughout the Imperial chamber. With the help of Revi's physical support, Eldmia presses the magic blade downward, pushing the monster against the destroyed floor. Lord Encantra lets out his last cry of extreme agony while the blue energy destroys his body completely. The blue-haired subordinate watches the scene in absolute shock and desperation upon seeing his leader be defeated in that way. Fallen and gravely wounded, Lord Encantra gathers his last strength to order him to finish opening the portal anyway. The demon mage is caught by surprise upon noticing a bright spear of yellow light suddenly appearing behind him. Even frightened, the subordinate clenches his teeth and tries to continue focusing his magic to keep the portal active. At that same instant, the mage Relai advances quickly to deliver a surprise strike with her staff. The young woman appears imposingly behind the opponent, ready to destabilize the channeling of the spell. Relai screams with determination, guaranteeing she will not allow them to complete their evil plans. With a violent and precise strike of her staff, the mage hits the opponent directly in the back with a large explosion of light. The impact crushes the demon mage directly against the stone floor, interrupting his channeling stance. Gasping and quite exhausted, Relai observes the fallen enemy in the hope of having prevented the advancement of the ritual. However, the fallen demon lets out a mocking laugh and warns that it is already too late, activating a magic circle under his hand. A violent discharge of shimmering energy propagates across the floor, ignoring the mage and going straight toward the center of the hall. The immense purple portal stabilizes completely, glowing with overwhelming and dangerous magical force. Eldmia and Revi observe the conclusion of the portal with expressions of pure astonishment and frustration. The protagonist lets out a cry of dread upon noticing that the gate has been completely opened by the enemy. Lord Encantra exhibits a macabre and victorious smile in the face of the successful conclusion of the plan. Next, the demon leader's body begins to inflate monstrously and violently with the accelerated circulation of his mana. The monster lets out a thunderous roar of pain and fury that echoes throughout the Imperial dungeon. Eldmia clenches his teeth upon realizing in panic that the opponent is trying to force an even greater increase in his power. Suddenly, an immense explosion of purple energy bursts from Lord Encantra, throwing Eldmia and Revi far away. Upon sliding across the floor to regain his balance, the boy realizes that it was not a suicidal self-destruction attack. With a bloody face, the hero tries to understand the true intention behind that desperate move of his rival. Eldmia realizes that the demon purposefully emptied all the mana from his body in one last breath just to push them away from there. Now weakened and thin, Lord Encantra runs desperately toward the portal to ensure his escape. Tightening his grip on the handle of his energy blade, the protagonist questions with anger if the enemy really thinks he will manage to escape. Looking back, the villain laughs hysterically and celebrates that the kingdom will finally fall now that the portal is fully open. However, Lord Encantra's gaze freezes in pure dread upon noticing the overwhelming presence that emerges right behind him. Wrapped in a shining and relentless blue aura, Eldmia warns in a dark tone that the demon will pay dearly for everything he did to his friends. With bloodshot eyes of fury, the youth screams that he will in no way allow the enemy to leave there alive. With an explosive impulse, the hero advances at high speed wrapped in his pure mana energy. The protagonist moves like a blue lightning bolt through the stone hall, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. Lord Encantra widens his eyes upon realizing that death is before him and that there is no time to escape. Eldmia intercepts the demon in midair right at the entrance to the magic rift. The youth's blade of pure mana glows with fatal intensity right next to his rival's neck. With a single clean and merciless strike, the protagonist decapitates Lord Encanter in midair, making blood gush intensely. The lifeless body and the severed head of the demon leader are thrown directly into the active portal. Eldmia tries to catch his breath while his body is pulled by the strong magnetic attraction generated by the dimensional rift. Without being able to resist the intense gravity of the portal, the youth ends up being sucked into the energy vortex immediately afterward. Fallen on the floor and gravely wounded, Revi extends her hand in desperation and screams her friend's name upon seeing him disappear before her eyes. On the other side of the gate, in an arid and rocky region, an army of demons observes the magic rift stabilizing completely. One of the demons celebrates happily that the operation was an absolute success and that the passage is firm. The troop commander orders them to prepare the armies to march as soon as his younger brother returns. He comments proudly that he was sure the plan would work. After all, his younger brother is extremely reliable. Suddenly, the portal begins to oscillate and glow intensely, signaling that someone is crossing the dimensional rift. The commander smiles confidently, announcing to his men that the great lord in country is finally back from his mission. A human boot steps firmly onto the sandy ground on the other side of the magic rift. Eldmia crosses the portal and emerges standing before the entire enemy army, holding his blade of pure mana with determination. The troop leader's smile disappears instantly, being replaced by an expression of total confusion upon noticing that that is not his brother. The demon general murmurs in shock upon realizing that a simple human managed to cross the energy gate. At that exact moment, Lord Encantra's inert body falls awkwardly to the floor right behind the protagonist. The severed head of the demon leader rolls through the sand at the feet of the army, revealing the tragic end of his invasion unit. Eldmia faces the immense army and the general with a cold and relentless look, ready to continue his battle in any way. The demon mage is caught by surprise upon noticing a bright sphere of yellow light suddenly appearing behind him. Even frightened, the subordinate clenches his teeth and tries to continue focusing his magic to keep the portal active. At that same instant, the mage Relai advances quickly to deliver a surprise strike with her staff. The young woman appears imposingly behind the opponent, ready to destabilize the channeling of the spell. Relai screams with determination, guaranteeing she will not allow them to complete their evil plans. With a violent and precise strike of her staff, the mage hits the opponent directly in the back with a large explosion of light. The impact crushes the demon mage directly against the stone floor, interrupting his channeling stance. Gasping and quite exhausted, Relai observes the fallen enemy in the hope of having prevented the advancement of the ritual. However, the fallen demon lets out a mocking laugh and warns that it is already too late, activating a magic circle under his hand. A violent discharge of shimmering energy propagates across the floor, ignoring the mage and going straight toward the center of the hall. The immense purple portal stabilizes completely, glowing with overwhelming and dangerous magical force. Eldmia and Revi observe the conclusion of the portal with expressions of pure astonishment and frustration. The protagonist lets out a cry of dread upon noticing that the gate has been completely opened by the enemy. Lord Encanter exhibits a macabre and victorious smile in the face of the successful conclusion of the plan. Next, the demon leader's body begins to inflate monstrously and violently with the accelerated circulation of his mana. The monster lets out a thunderous roar of pain and fury that echoes throughout the Imperial dungeon. Eldmia clenches his teeth upon realizing in panic that the opponent is trying to force an even greater increase in his power. Suddenly, an immense explosion of purple energy bursts from Lord Encantre, throwing Eldmia and Revi far away. Upon sliding across the floor to regain his balance, the boy realizes that it was not a suicidal self-destruction attack. With a bloody face, the hero tries to understand the true intention behind that desperate move of his rival. Eldmia realizes that the demon purposefully emptied all the mana from his body in one last breath, just to push them away from there. Now weakened and thin, Lord Encanter runs desperately toward the portal to ensure his escape. Tightening his grip on the handle of his energy blade, the protagonist questions with anger if the enemy really thinks he will manage to escape. Looking back, the villain laughs hysterically and celebrates that the kingdom will finally fall, now that the portal is fully open. However, Lord Encanter's gaze freezes in pure dread upon noticing the overwhelming presence that emerges right behind him. Wrapped in a shining and relentless blue aura, Eldmia warns in a dark tone that the demon will pay dearly for everything he did to his friends. With bloodshot eyes of fury, the youth screams that he will in no way allow the enemy to leave there alive. With an explosive impulse, the hero advances at high speed wrapped in his pure mana energy. The protagonist moves like a blue lightning bolt through the stone hall, closing the distance in a fraction of a second. Lord Encantra widens his eyes upon realizing that death is before him and that there is no time to escape. Aldmia intercepts the demon in midair right at the entrance to the magic rift. The youth's blade of pure mana glows with fatal intensity right next to his rival's neck. With a single clean and merciless strike, the protagonist decapitates Lord Encantra in midair, making blood gush intensely. The lifeless body and the severed head of the demon leader are thrown directly into the active portal. Eldmia tries to catch his breath while his body is pulled by the strong magnetic attraction generated by the dimensional rift. Without being able to resist the intense gravity of the portal, the youth ends up being sucked into the energy vortex immediately afterward. Fallen on the floor and gravely wounded, Revi extends her hand in desperation and screams her friend's name upon seeing him disappear before her eyes. On the other side of the gate, in an arid and rocky region, an army of demons observes the magic rift stabilizing completely. One of the demons celebrates happily that the operation was an absolute success and that the passage is firm. The troop commander orders them to prepare the armies to march as soon as his younger brother returns. He comments proudly that he was sure the plan would work. After all, his younger brother is extremely reliable. Suddenly, the portal begins to oscillate and glow intensely, signaling that someone is crossing the dimensional rift. The commander smiles confidently, announcing to his men that the great Lord Encantra is finally back from his mission. A human boot steps firmly onto the sandy ground on the other side of the magic rift. Eldmia crosses the portal and emerges standing before the entire enemy army, holding his blade of pure mana with determination. The troop leader's smile disappears instantly, being replaced by an expression of total confusion upon noticing that that is not his brother. The demon general murmurs in shock upon realizing that a simple human managed to cross the energy gate. At that exact moment, Lord Encantra's inert body falls awkwardly to the floor right behind the protagonist. The severed head of the demon leader rolls through the sand at the feet of the army, revealing the tragic end of his invasion unit. Eldmia faces the immense army and the general with a cold and relentless look, ready to continue his battle in any way. Revi says that they will take care of the common soldiers and orders Eldmia to focus his attention on the rest of the problem. With a confident and bloody smile, the youth accepts the challenge of his companions. Eldmia decides to risk everything in one last move and sets off with determination toward his goal. Lord Decan senses the bluff and roars with hatred upon noticing that those were the alleged elite troops mentioned by the boy. The protagonist channels until the last drop of his remaining mana into his broken blade to ensure the strike works. Letting out a crazed scream of determination, the hero launches himself with full force to attack the large crystal spear. Eldmia runs at full speed toward the mana bomb to deliver the decisive strike. With a thunderous impact, he collides his energy sword against the protective shield of the evil artifact. Lord Decam laughs and mocks the hero, claiming that the barrier could only be scratched by totally pure mana. However, the demon general was not counting on the fact that the youth's energy is exactly mana in its purest state. The commander widens his eyes upon realizing that he made a terrible mistake in underestimating the boy's power. Eldmia's blade breaks the magic barrier with ease, cracking the surface of the gigantic sphere. The demon soldiers enter into complete panic upon witnessing a simple human break a mana barrier of that level. The hero drives his blade deeply into the core of the bomb, releasing an immense unstable discharge of energy. Shining cracks spread throughout the artifact, indicating that the core is about to collapse. Satisfied with the result, the youth celebrates upon noticing that his overload plan worked. Desperate, the demons begin to flee in a desperate retreat in the face of the imminent devastating explosion. Lord Deccan remains totally paralyzed in the same place, unable to accept the defeat of his invasion fleet. The general murmurs in shock upon realizing that that boy is indeed a human, capable of mastering pure mana in such an impressive way. Completely exhausted, Eldmia collapses on the stone floor without any remaining strength in his body. The protagonist tries to move but realizes with desperation that his legs simply do not respond anymore. The boy realizes that he forced his own body far beyond the supportable limit and is now totally paralyzed. Suddenly, he widens his eyes upon noticing the mortal danger that is right before him. The immense mana bomb begins to emit a blinding glow, signaling that the explosion will happen in a matter of seconds. Without being able to move to escape, the youth faces imminent death with an expression of total helplessness. At the last instant, several hands emerge from the portal and grab Eldmia firmly to pull him back to safety. His companions manage to rescue him in a hurry, bringing the hero back to his original world before the rift closes. On the other side of the gate, an absurdly massive golden energy explosion consumes the entire canyon inhabited by the demons. General Lord Dakan is completely swallowed by the devastating glare generated by the destruction of the bomb. The violent detonation obliterates the enemy forces and seals the threat of that invasion army for good. In the Imperial Chamber of the Humans, the dimensional portal begins to blink unstably while closing for good. The entire team of adventurers is ejected violently out of the magic rift just before its complete extinction. Eldmia falls motionless on the stone floor, covered in grave wounds and bleeding heavily. The protagonist's vision begins to fail and darkens slowly while pain consumes his last bit of strength. The youth lets out a weak sigh of pain before losing consciousness completely and blacking out. Sometime later, Eldmia finally wakes up in a comfortable bed with his chest completely wrapped in bandages. Sitting up with difficulty, the boy realizes that he fainted and reflects on how that familiar feeling of exhaustion has happened before. Suddenly, footsteps approach, and a welcoming voice celebrates the fact that the youth has finally woken up. Eldmia recognizes the man in the dark cloak as being Walter, who explains that he is in a hospital in the royal capital and was brought by his friends. Walter apologizes for the dangerous outcome and admits that, although they knew about the demon's general plan, they did not expect the presence of a monster of Enchantress class. The ally reveals that he has already heard the details of the mission through the other survivors and knows about the secret construction of the magic portal. Walter praises the hero and acknowledges that it was thanks to Eldmia's direct efforts that the enemy's terrible secret weapon was contained in time. In the name of the entire kingdom, the man offers a sincere thank you, but the protagonist ponders humbly that he only achieved the feat because he had his team by his side. Concerned about his adventure companions, the boy asks anxiously if they are all well and safe. Walter reassures the boy, guaranteeing that everyone recovered quickly and has already been discharged, but they need to maintain discretion since it is a secret operation. Eldmia reflects in silence on the irony of needing to hide even after saving the kingdom from that terrible demonic invasion. The cloaked man changes his tone and reveals that he did not come to the hospital just to pay his formal thanks. The hero senses the mystery in the air when the visitor announces that he has an extremely special proposal to make to him. Walter faces him seriously and decides to get straight to the point of his visit to the hospital room. Positioning himself before the youth's bed, the emissary formally offers Eldmia the opportunity to become an official knight of the kingdom. Walter explains that Eldmia's combat ability and judgment far exceed his age, in addition to revealing that the high echelon see enormous potential in him. He continues, saying that many believe the youth should be formally named a knight and have his feats fully recognized. While Eldmia ponders in silence on the hospital bed, Walter reinforces that is an extremely rare opportunity. After reflecting for an instant, the youth finally breaks the silence to give his answer. To Walter's complete surprise and shock, Eldmia refuses the offer immediately and decides to leave the proposal aside. The protagonist begins to get dressed and states that the intentions behind that invitation are obvious and seem too blatant for him. Walter becomes visibly tense and asks seriously what the boy is suggesting with that accusation. Eldmia takes a few steps forward and begins to expose the true situation of the human kingdom. The youth faces the man and asks directly if the kingdom is not being cornered in the war against the demons. Walter is completely speechless and begins to sweat cold in the face of the boy's sharp perception. Eldmia explains that he found it very strange from the beginning when the kingdom, knowing that the demons were hiding near the capital, decided to send novice adventurers instead of the official army under the excuse of not attracting attention. He walks toward the exit and adds that secret mission was just a disguise to hide how poorly the war is really going, since they did not have spare soldiers to send. The protagonist approaches Walter and asks if he is wrong, pointing out that the kingdom is so desperate that it tries to push a knight title on an unknown adventurer just to keep him under control. Eldmia makes it clear that he has no interest in serving as a shield for the kingdom's superiors and tells them to look for someone else, leaving Walter downcast and without arguments. Even so, Walter tries to argue that becoming a knight would help in the youth's plans to fight the demons, but Eldmia retorts, saying that the way he fights is a purely personal choice of his. He adds with a determined look that the same goes for the way he plans to get his revenge. Upon preparing to leave, the youth hears Walter call his name once again. The man does not deny the accusations and admits openly that the kingdom is in a critical situation and suffering from a grave lack of soldiers. However, Walter stresses that, no matter how bad things are, they would never give the knight title to just anyone, because they really believe that Eldmia is someone the kingdom needs desperately. He warns that they will not interfere in the path the youth chooses to follow, but advises him not to forget that many eyes are already turned to him from now on. Eldmia listens to the advice in silence with a firm and thoughtful expression on his face. Meanwhile, the movement follows normally through the sunny streets of the kingdom's capital. Upon walking through the city, the protagonist is surprised by someone who is waiting for him on the way. He finds himself face to face with Cheryl Augatorf, who is leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, watching his approach. Eldmia approaches, smiling, and admits he feels quite touched that she came to meet him upon his hospital discharge. The girl faces him in silence with a look of distrust and boredom that cuts through the boy's excitement. The youth is left embarrassed and asks why she is looking at him in such a strange way. Cheryl turns her back and comments that he seems quite alive for someone who just faced demons. But the boy is confused when she starts to walk away for no reason. She orders him to accompany her, as there is an important place where she needs to stop by first. The two then enter a local establishment together full of weapons. Upon looking around, Eldmia realizes right away that she has taken him to a weapon shop. Cheryl explains that his sword broke in battle and that her father, Sir Ekov, ordered them to prepare a new one, telling him to choose the best blade he can find there. Grateful for his master's consideration, the boy begins to analyze the options available in the shop. Eldmia grabs the local blacksmith's attention to ask for some specific information about the stock. He asks if there's any sword capable of withstanding power even stronger than aura, leaving the blacksmith scared and asking if the youth plans to hunt dragons. The protagonist comments that he hoped to find a blade made by dwarves, but the merchant warns that he does not work with items that expensive and rare in that place. Cheryl lets out an annoyed sigh and reprimands Eldmia for having gotten too excited after she told him to choose the best weapon. She asks him to choose something more reasonable since he will not fight tomorrow, without noticing that a mysterious dwarf watches them from afar, from behind a beam. The full-bearded dwarf continues peeking at Eldmia and Cheryl's conversation in a quite suspicious way. Later, the two youths head toward a luxurious and imposing mansion in the capital. While they wait in the living room, a butler serves tea and warns that the Marchioness will arrive shortly, at which moment Cheryl comments that is Eldmia's first visit to Lady Lagnus's property. She explains that the Marchioness is always so busy that they barely manage to greet her properly even when she was in the capital. Suddenly, a noise from the outside grabs the boy's attention and he looks curiously in the direction of the window. Upon sighting several knights with unknown armor in the courtyard, Eldmia is confused and Cheryl explains that unit belongs to the Eshno Empire, which invited the Marchioness for a meeting. The protagonist is shocked by the mention of the Eshno Empire and asks the reason for calling Revi, making his friend clarify that they seem to want to understand the current situation of the human kingdom. She compliments that the Marchioness wanted to hear the details of the recent incidents directly from Eldmia, and that is why she brought him there. The Eshno Empire is known for dominating the majority of human lands across the continent. Furthermore, the imperial nation possesses the strongest and most fearsome military power in the world. However, the great differentiator that puts the empire above any other country is the fact that it is the only territory capable of giving birth to legendary heroes. At that instant, the sound of the great double doors opening makes Eldmia turn immediately in the direction of the room's entrance. Suddenly, the great doors open and Revi enters the room with a big smile, celebrating that it has been some time since the last time she saw Eldmia. She also greets Cheryl, who thanks the Marchioness politely for her presence on her property. Upon sitting down to talk, Revi comments that the youth seems much more mature now, making Eldmia joke that she is the last person who should say something like that. The boy expresses his joy at finally being able to reunite with his friend, and Revi agrees that it really has not been easy at all for them to get some time to see each other. Eldmia observes her with admiration and highlights that she must have gone through a lot to manage to reach the capital. Revi smiles in a docile way and confesses that, in truth, working as a marchioness makes her remember her late father, which makes her genuinely happy. However, she changes the tone of her voice and reveals that the true reason for having called him there is to hear the whole story about the demon's infiltration, which Eldmia realizes is directly linked to the Empire's invitation. The protagonist agrees to share the details and decides to start the explanation from the very beginning, recalling the bandit hunt that occurred at the winery. At the end of the report, Revi is extremely worried upon realizing that the situation is much worse than she imagined, since the enemies not only infiltrated but dug deep to the core of the kingdom. She begins to reflect aloud and concludes that the real intention of the Empire in inviting her must be something much more serious. Eldmir realizes that his own fears were correct and ends up leaving his friend confused upon demonstrating so much sudden concern. Revi then looks down apprehensively and, with a visible feeling of guilt, asks a very important favor of the youth. She asks for Eldmia to accompany her on her trip to the Empire so that he can also meet the hero personally, leaving the youth in complete shock at the revelation. A short time later, an immense portal of bright blue energy opens in the middle of the plaza to transport them. Eldmia manages to cross the magic passage and emerges on the other side wearing an elegant blue uniform with gold details. The youth widens his eyes and is completely impressed with the sight that reveals itself right before him. Before him stands a colossal and beautiful cathedral of white stones that stands out majestically under the open sky. The protagonist contemplates the immensity of that gigantic and rich coastal city, realizing that he has finally reached the imposing Ashnoa Empire. Suddenly, a sound of discomfort coming from behind makes the boy shift his attention and look back at the transport portal. He finds Rebby bent over and feeling sick next to the passage, asking if she is okay, while the girl complains that her stomach is still spinning from not using a portal for a long time. The Marchioness tries to catch her breath with an expression visibly nauseated and worn out by the magic trip. Upon walking through the streets of the capital, the two observe noble citizens wearing fine attire and children playing peacefully around a beautiful fountain. Already recovered, Revi comments, amazed, about how calm and peaceful the place is, making Elmia agree that that is indeed the maximum representation of human civilization. The Marchioness smiles upon noticing that it is difficult even to believe that a cruel war is happening somewhere in the world, leaving the protagonist in silence and thoughtful. The youth then looks back with an expression of doubt and questions if they really are safe traveling that way. Elmia points out that their retinue counts on only 5 people in total and that he is the only guard in charge of protecting her. Rebi explains that, officially, she is there only to talk as Marchioness of Etisiel, and that appearing with an entire army behind her would seem too suspicious, which makes the boy agree with his friend's logic. At that moment, a leather boot steps firmly onto the floor right in front of them, and a solemn voice announces that everyone was already waiting for them. A man with long dark hair appears, bowing elegantly in a greeting of welcome, introducing himself as Marquis Asdel Lebend, the guide designated to receive them in the imperial capital. Revive returns the courtesy with respect and states it is an honor to be received personally by him, while the host guarantees that that is the minimum they could do for the representative of EDCL. The Marquis shifts his gaze to Elmia and asks who he is, leading Rebi to introduce him quickly as her assistant and personal bodyguard, who was added at the last minute to the trip. Asdel narrows his golden eyes in an analytical and mysterious way upon fixing his attention on the young guardian. Perceiving the tension in the man's look, the protagonist only lets out a yellow, awkward, and graceless laugh to try to disguise his discomfort. The Marquis soon recovers his sympathy and warns that a carriage is already totally prepared to take them to their final destination. Revi thanks him happily for the hospitality received, while Elmia continues to follow her somewhat distrustful and silent. Already installed and traveling, the boy resumes the serious subject and asks what she meant exactly with that story about meeting the hero. Back to the conversation they had before leaving, Revi explains that the Empire did not invite her only to collect information about the incident with the demons. She reveals that their true intention is to have her meet the chosen hero and give support in his magic training for an entire week. Eldmia is indignant at the request and questions the reason for wanting her help. but the young woman admits to not knowing the exact reason, since there would be no logical reason for her to be the chosen one. The protagonist crosses his arms, irritated, and complains about the strangeness of that court, asking if they are there only to serve as an audience for their hero to show off. Suddenly, the boy begins to analyze the facts more calmly and realizes that there's something much bigger and much darker behind this whole situation. Eldmia deduces that, with the kingdom on the verge of collapse, the empire made sure to invite an important marchioness just to exhibit the hero as an intimidating demonstration of strength right in front of her. He concludes with a serious look that attitude of the empire is, in the end, a clear message of power. Revi agrees fully and adds that it is a subtle threat to show that they possess the definitive weapon to defeat the Demon King, alerting the kingdom of Iticiel not to try any foolishness. The protagonist sighs in discouragement upon noticing that the great empire possesses a mentality so small and petty, but the Marchioness ponders that is exactly how politics works in practice. She concludes by saying that they are already planning what the world will be like after the end of the war, and that, very likely, their real objective is to place the kingdom under the total control of the empire. Back in the present, inside the carriage, Eldmia observes the landscape through the window and reflects in silence on the alarming possibility of having their home dominated. The trip finally comes to an end when the coachman announces the arrival at the Ilios Academy, informing that the Marchioness will attend classes there as a temporary student during the next week. The two youths disembark and begin to walk side by side through the immense and luxurious corridors of the educational institution. Eldmia looks around completely dazzled and comments that the academy where the hero studies is infinitely more sophisticated than any construction they possess in their own kingdom. While they walk through the luxurious academy, Revi suddenly spots someone she knows and lets out a cry of surprise. She runs happily toward a robust man with gray hair and a beard, calling him master, while he celebrates their reunion after so long. The man jokes, asking if he should now refer to her formally as Marchioness Lagnus, and Reverie responds with affection that her master never changes. The young woman then turns to Eldmia and explains that gentleman was the one responsible for teaching her magic when she was just a child. The veteran introduces himself formally as Ragnall Bandies, revealing himself to be a mage of the royal court of the kingdom of Iticiel and a professor at the renowned academy. Eldmia shakes his hand with respect and introduces himself, but cannot stop himself from finding it strange that a mage possesses a physical build so strong and intimidating. Ragnall lets out a friendly laugh and says that he is finally meeting the famous Eldmia of whom he has already heard so much. The master praises the boy's posture and Eldmia jokes, saying that Ragnall seems too robust to be just an ordinary mage. The professor finds the comment funny and responds in a humorous way that a healthy mind should always inhabit a healthy body. Ragnall explains that he has already been informed by the Empire about the situation and guarantees that he will give all the necessary support to the two during the week. Shortly afterward, the group gathers in the immense and luxurious training courtyard of the academy. Upon seeing that all the students are gathered, Ragnall asks if someone is missing, and his assistant warns that only the hero of the Empire has not arrived yet. The professor sighs, irritated with the boy's lateness on such an important day, since he had asked for him to come earlier precisely to introduce him to the Marchioness's retinue. The other students begin to whisper, annoyed, commenting that the ego of that boy really needs to be put in its proper place. Eldmia observes the buzz from afar and begins to notice the strange atmosphere that has settled among the students. The youth reflects that hostile and disunited atmosphere is very strange for a place that supposedly harbors the savior hero of the world. Suddenly, a mocking and dragged-out voice echoes through the courtyard, asking for ironic apologies for the lateness. Eldmia and Revi turn immediately in the direction of the entrance to see who has just arrived. The hero of the Empire appears, walking in an arrogant and relaxed way with his arms supported on the shoulders of two girls. Eldmia is left completely open-mouthed upon noticing that the behavior of that individual resembles much more that of a delinquent than that of a hero. The boy faces the orange-haired individual and barely manages to believe that he is the so acclaimed hero of the Eshnoa Empire. The newcomer focuses his attention directly on Revi and comments with a convinced smile that he would have come much earlier if he had known she would be there. He approaches and asks in an audacious way if she is the marchioness of the kingdom who will serve as his training partner, receiving a polite and formal response from Rivian. The hero is enchanted by the beauty of the young woman and complains mentally that no one had warned him before about the appearance of his guest. Ignoring completely the formality of the meeting, the boy approaches her face and invites her to go out and have fun together after classes end. He places his hand in a loose way on Revi's shoulder and insists that he knows a great tavern so that they can relax and talk better. Before the hero can continue with the unwanted approach, Eldmia appears quickly and holds his wrist in the air with a firm and relentless grip. The protagonist asks for polite apologies for interrupting the moment, leaving the hero of the empire completely surprised and confused with that reaction. With a dark look and emanating an intensely murderous aura, Eldmia asks coldly if the boy happens to have any desire to die today. The bold intervention of the youth leaves Ragnell, the assistant, and all the students around completely paralyzed with panic and horror. The hero loses his smile instantly and questions with irritation if the protagonist really knows who he is messing with by threatening him in that way. Eldmia only tightens his grip on his wrist with even more force, making the opponent groan in pain and face him with anger. However, to Eldmia's surprise, the rival suddenly opens a big smile and begins to laugh loudly, commenting that the boy has a lot of courage and is quite fun. He then turns to Revi and asks who that annoying individual is, to which the Marchioness responds calmly that he is her personal bodyguard. The hero smiles to himself and comments that he found it very interesting that the kingdom of Itseal shares someone so audacious since all the other foreign visitors he met were cowards and extremely boring. Eldmia faces him seriously and demands that, regardless of finding the situation funny, the hero demonstrates at least the basic respect due to the Marchioness. Perceiving that the situation is about to get out of control, Ragnall intervenes and orders everyone to calm down so that they can finalize the formal introductions. The professor places his hand on Eldmia's shoulder and asks discreetly for him not to get carried away by emotions, reminding him that there are many witnesses watching them there. Next, he reprimands the hero harshly, alerting him to remember his position and stressing that having good manners is a fundamental part of the hero's duty. The protagonist only observes the rival moving away with an extremely serious and analytical look. The assistant with glasses tries to break the tension and announces nervously that the Marchioness of Itseal is officially there to assist in the practical training of the hero. He wishes that everyone manages to get along during that week of cooperation, at which moment Revi introduces herself formally to the entire class present. However, the students of the Empire begin to whisper in a malicious way, commenting that the family of Rebiant had their lands totally destroyed by the Demon King's armies. Another student mocks in a gossiping tone about how long the Marchioness will manage to last there, leaving the young woman visibly shaken and sad with the disrespectful comments. Ignoring the gossip, Ragnall assumes command of the class and orders the assistant instructors to prepare the field for the practical lesson. The young assistant kneels and positions his hand over a magic circle on the floor, starting the conjuration of a simulated battlefield. Bright lines of blue mana begin to spread with force through the checkered floor as the spell is channeled. An immense column of pure magic and luminous energy rises majestically right in the center of the training courtyard. Rings of reddish energy begin to form and spin quickly around the top of the large magic structure. The immense barrier expands throughout the entire perimeter of the courtyard, sealing the area to give the official start to the special training. The magic energy continues to flow intensely and consolidates on the floor of the courtyard, creating a shining rectangular structure. Eldmia observes the sky of the arena and asks, intrigued, what that large luminous ring is that is floating above them. The assistant explains with pride that the ring is a fruit of Imperial magic engineering, an advanced device that uses illusion and sensory interference to recreate extremely realistic battle simulations. The boy still tries to understand the concept of illusion and interference, but the instructor smiles and says it is much easier simply to show how everything works in practice. Ragnall assumes leadership and calls the students, Mari and Luis, to start a simulated combat, ordering them to create their respective weapons for the fight. Immediately, the young warrior channels his energy and materializes a bluish magic sword directly in his empty hand. At the same time, the girl invokes a pink staff filled with magic brightness to use as her spell channeler. Eldmia watches the scene completely perplexed, impressed to see real weapons appearing literally out of nowhere before his eyes. Ragnar makes a quick signal with his hand and authorizes the immediate start of the combat between the two students. Lewis advances quickly, delivering a blow with his energy sword, while Mari prepares to counter the investment. The young mage concentrates a strong charge of golden mana on the tip of her staff to launch an attack spell against the opponent. She executes an evasive jump backward while firing a continuous burst of shining spells in the direction of the warrior. Even under heavy fire, the swordsman demonstrates great ability by dodging and repelling the energy projectiles using only his blade. The combat becomes extremely agile, with the two youths exchanging fast attacks a few steps away from each other. The protagonist follows the intense exchange of blows without managing to divert his eyes for even a second. Eldmia comments to himself that the rhythm of the fight is so violent that they seem to be really trying to kill each other, not reminding him at all of a simple school simulation. Suddenly, Luis commits a slip, ends up suffering a full impact on his leg, and lets out a scream of pain upon realizing he became vulnerable. Taking advantage of the opening instantly, Marie points her shining staff in the direction of her rival and celebrates the imminent victory. The mage fires a violent explosion of fire point blank, enveloping the entire body of the opponent in a huge curtain of flames. Eldmia panics upon thinking that the boy was completely vaporized by the devastating attack, but the assistant asks for calm and says to just continue observing the outcome. Shortly afterward, the upper half of Luis's body begins to disintegrate softly into golden particles of pure light. The youth resurges totally intact shortly after the luminous effect dissipates, letting out a frustrated sigh and admitting that he lost the duel. Ragnar declares officially the end of the combat and announces Mari as the great winner of today's demonstration. Still trying to process everything he saw, Eldmia asks, shocked, what just happened there? And the instructor confirms that everything was just an illusion generated by the red ring. The assistant explains that the sensory ring alters the perception of the battlefield with light and illusion magic, reading the user's intention to transform their ideas into realistic projections. He details that the technology is capable of reproducing faithfully weapons, spells, injuries, and even the real pain corresponding to the level of ability of each person. Thanks to that innovative mechanism, the students managed to accumulate a vast practical experience that approaches very closely to a real combat, but without running any risk of death. Eldmia reflects, impressed, about how the Empire's magic has developed to such an absurd level, realizing that the technological disparity in relation to his kingdom is gigantic. The instructor suggests that the Martianess be the next to test the simulator, but Ragnar interferes immediately, arguing that Rebbe just went through a long space trip and should only observe on the first day. The assistant is hesitant and reveals with shyness that participation is, in truth, a direct requirement of the Marquis who leads the region. Ragnar is deeply annoyed upon hearing about the Marquis's order and casts a sharp look behind him. The experienced mage raises his eyes in the direction of the upper balcony of the Academy's building to face whoever is in control. From high up, Marquis Esdela Bend observes coldly the entire movement of the training courtyard while supporting his arms on the parapet. The Marquis is approached by an ally who comments on his presence there and questions who will be the chosen adversary to face the invited Marchiones. Esdel reveals that he sent the young Ethilua to assume the combat, commenting with disdain that the hero of the Empire would not need to bother fighting someone of a lower level. The companion agrees with the plan and prepares to descend, while the Marquis sketches a sarcastic smile of satisfaction. The objective of Esdo with the forced duel is clear: to humiliate Revi publicly and show exactly what her place is before the power of the Empire. While she waits in the bleachers, the young Marchioness maintains a serious and concentrated expression upon perceiving the hostile climate against her. Ragnar perceives the ulterior motives of the organization and says to the assistant that he will intervene personally with the Marquis to resolve the misunderstanding, asking for Revi not to worry. However, the Marquiness rises with determination, clenches her fists, and surprises everyone by declaring firmly that she wishes to fight. Her former master tries to contain her, saying there's no need to expose herself to that provocation, but she guarantees with a smile that it is all right. Revi focuses her determined look on Ragnar and asks rhetorically who he thinks was responsible for training her so well, calming the veteran's concerns. In the face of her insistence, the assistant announces that the opponent will be Adalia and asks aloud for the young woman to prepare herself for the arena. Upon hearing her name, the blonde Athalua asks the hero if she can go all out in the dispute, and he only responds in a lazy way to do whatever she wants. The hero of the empire gives a convinced wink and confesses that the only person who really awakens his interest in that place is someone else. He fixes his eyes directly on the protagonist, who watches the entire movement from afar in an attentive way. Eldnia approaches Revi, worried about the real intentions behind the fight, but the Marchioness only smiles and says that both already knew that things would end up that way from the very beginning. With a lot of confidence and head held high, she removes her cape and prepares to face the Empire's challenge head-on in any way.